and trade-offs and things like this. This is a hugely hotly contested world. If you look at C++, the way this works is that if you define a variable or a set of variables within a function, they get destroyed in a last in, first out order.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like nesting. Okay. This has a huge problem because if you have a big scope and you define a whole bunch of values at the top, and then you use them, and then you do a whole bunch of code that doesn't use them,
Mm-hmm.
they don't get destroyed until the very end of that scope, right? And so this also destroys tail calls. So
Mm-hmm.
good functional programming, right? This has a bunch of different impacts on, you talk about reference counting optimizations and things like this, a bunch of very low level things. And so what Mojo does is it has a different approach on that from any language I'm familiar with, where it destroys them as soon as possible. And by doing that, you get better memory use, you get better predictability, you get tail calls that work, you get a bunch of other things, you get better ownership tracking. There's a bunch of these very simple things that are very fundamental that are already built in there in Mojo today that are the things that nobody talks about generally, but when they don't work right, you find out and you have to complain about.
Is it trivial to know what's the soonest possible to delete a thing that's not going to be used again?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's generally trivial. It's after the last use of it. So if you define X as a string, and then you have some use of X somewhere in your code,
Within that
it's the last
scope, you
one.
mean? Within a
So
scope that is accessible?
it's yeah, exactly. So you can only use something within its scope,
Yeah.
and so then it doesn't wait until the end of the scope to delete it. It destroys it after the last use.
So there's kind of some very ego machine that's just sitting there and deleting.
Yeah, and it's all in the compiler, so it's not at runtime, which is also cool. And so
Interesting.
and so what? And this is actually non-trivial because you have control flow,
Yeah, right.
and so it gets
Right.
complicated pretty quickly. And so like getting this right was
Also,
not
you have to insert delete like in a lot of places.
potentially, yeah, exactly. And so the compiler has to reason about this, and this is
Oh
where
boy.
again it's experience building languages and not getting this right. So again, you get another chance to do it, and you get basic things like this, right? But it's extremely powerful when you do that, right? And so there's a bunch of things like that that kind of combine together. And this comes back to you get a chance to do it the right way, and make sure that every brick you put down is really good, so that when you put more bricks on top of it, they stack up to something that's beautiful.
Well, there's also like how many design discussions do there have to be about particular details, like implementation of particular small features? Because the features that seem small, I bet some of them might be like really require really big design decisions.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, let me give you another example of this. Python has a feature called async await.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a new feature. I mean, in the long arc of Python history, it's a relatively new feature, right? That allows way more expressive asynchronous programming.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Again, this is a Python's a beautiful thing, and they did things that are great for Mojo for completely different reasons. The reason the async await got added to Python, as far as I know, is because Python doesn't support threads. Okay. And so Python doesn't support threads, but you want to work with networking and other things like that can block. I mean, Python does support threads, it's just not its strength. Um, and so they added this feature called async await. It's also seen in other languages like Swift and JavaScript and many other places as well. Async await in Mojo is amazing because we have a high performance heterogeneous compute runtime underneath the covers that then allows non-blocking I/O, so you get full use of your accelerator.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge. It turns out it's actually really an important part of fully utilizing the machine. You talk about design discussions. That took a lot of discussions, right? And it probably will require more iteration. And so, my philosophy with Mojo is that we have a small team of really good people that are pushing forward, and they're very good at the extremely deep, knowing how the compiler and runtime and like all the low level stuff works together. But they're not perfect. It's the same thing as the Swift team, right? And this is where one of the reasons we released Mojo much earlier is so we can get feedback. And we've already like renamed a keyword due to community feedback. And
Which one?
we use an ampersand, and now it's named inout. We're not renaming existing Python keywords because that
Yeah.
breaks compatibility, right? We're renaming things we're adding and making sure that they are designed well. We get usage experience, we iterate and work with the community because, again, if you scale something really fast and everybody writes all their code and they start using it in production, then it's impossible to change. And so you want to learn from people, you want to iterate and work on that early on. And this is where design discussions, it's actually quite important to do.
Could you incorporate an emoji like into the language, into the main language? Like
Could.
like a
Do you have a favorite one?
Well, I really like in terms of humor, I like Raffle, whatever, rolling on the floor laughing. So that could be like what would that be the use case for that? Like an exception, throw an exception of some sort. I don't
You should totally file a feature request.
or maybe a heart one. It has to be a heart one.
People have told me that I'm insane, so I'm liking this.
I'm gonna use the viral nature of the internet to actually get this passed.
Well, I mean, it's funny. You come back to the flame emoji file extension, right? The we have the option to use the flame emoji, which just even that concept caused, for example, the people at GitHub to say, "Now I've seen everything." Like,
yeah, there's something. It's reinvigorating. It's like it's like, oh, that's possible. That's really cool. For some reason that makes everything else like seem really
I think the
exciting.
world is ready for this stuff, right? And so, when we have a package manager, we'll clearly have to innovate by having the compiled package thing be the little box with the bow on it, right? I mean, it has to be done.
It has to be done. Is there some stuff on the roadmap that you're particularly stressed about or excited about that you're thinking about a lot?
I mean, as a today snapshot, which will be obsolete tomorrow, the lifetime stuff is really exciting. And so lifetimes give you safe references to memory without dangling pointers. And so this has been done in languages like Rust before. And so we have a new approach, which is really cool. I'm very excited about that. That'll be out to the community very soon. The traits feature is really a big deal. And so that's blocking a lot of API design. And so there's that. I think that's really exciting. A lot of it is these kind of table stakes features. One of the things that is, again, also lessons learned with Swift is that programmers in general like to add syntactic sugar.
Mhm.
And so it's like, oh, well, this annoying thing, like in Python, you have to spell unbar add. Why can't I just use plus?
Mhm.
Def plus, come on. Why can't I just do that, right? And so trivial bit of syntactic sugar, it makes sense. It's beautiful. It's obvious. We're trying not to do that. And so for two different reasons, one of which is that, again, lesson learned with Swift. Swift has a lot of syntactic sugar, which may be a good thing, maybe not. I don't know. But because it's such an easy and addictive thing to do, sugar like makes your blood get crazy, right? Like the community will really dig into that and want to do a lot of that. And I think it's very distracting from building the core abstractions. The second is we want to be a good member of the Python community, right? And so we want to work with the broader Python community. And yeah, we're pushing forward a bunch of systems programming features and we need to build them out to understand them. But once we get a long ways forward, I want to make sure that we go back to the Python community and say, okay, let's do some design reviews. Let's actually talk about this stuff. Let's figure out how we want this stuff all to work together. And syntactic sugar just makes all that more complicated. So
And yeah, list comprehensions that yet to be implemented.
yeah,
And my favorite, dictionaries.
yeah, there's some
Can't
there's
wait
some
for
basic stuff.
dictionaries.
0.1.
0.1.
Yeah, but nonetheless, it's actually still quite interesting and useful.
As you mentioned, modular is very new. Mojo is very new. It's a relatively small team
Yeah,
that's building up this
yeah, we're just
gigantic stack,
yeah.
this incredible stack that's going to perhaps define the future of development of our AI overlords.
We just hope it will be useful.
As do all of us. So what have you learned from this process of building up a team? Maybe one question is, how do you hire
Yeah,
great programmers, great people that operate in this compiler, hardware, machine learning, software, interface design space,
yeah,
and maybe are a little
yeah,
bit fluid in
yeah.
what they can do?
So okay, so
Language design too.
so building a company is just as interesting in different ways as building a language.
Mhm.
Like different skill sets, different things, but super interesting. And I've built a lot of teams in a lot of different places. If you zoom in from the big problem into recruiting, well, so here's our problem. Okay, I'll be very straightforward about this. We started modular with a lot of conviction about we understand the problems, we understand the customer pain points. We need to work backwards from the suffering in the industry, and if we solve those problems, we think it'll be useful for people. But the problem is that the people we need to hire, as you say, are all these super specialized people that have jobs at big tech worlds, right? And I don't think we have product market fit in the way that a normal startup does, or we don't have product market fit challenges because right now everybody's using AI and so many of them are suffering and they want help.
Mhm.
And so again, we started with strong conviction. Now, again, you have to hire and recruit the best, and the best all have jobs.
Mhm.
And so what we've done is we said, okay, well, let's build an amazing culture. Start with that. That's usually not something a company starts with. Usually you hire a bunch of people and then people start fighting and it turns into a gigantic mess.
Mhm.
And then you try to figure out how to improve your culture later. My co-founder Tim in particular is super passionate about making sure that that's right. And we've spent a lot of time early on to make sure that we can scale.
Can you comment, sorry, before we get to the second,
Yeah.
what makes for a good culture?
So I mean, there's many different cultures, and I've learned many things from
Yeah, you
many
worked with
different people.
several very unique, almost famously unique cultures.
And some of them I learned what to do, and some of them I learned what not to do.
Yep.
Okay, and so we want an inclusive culture. I believe in like amazing people working together,
Mhm.
and so I've seen cultures where you have amazing people and they're fighting each other. I see amazing people and they're told what to do.
Mhm.
Like thou shalt line up and do what I say. It doesn't matter if it's the right thing. Do it.
Mhm.
Right. And neither of these is and I've seen people that have no direction. They're just kind of floating in different places and they want to be amazing. They just don't know how. And so a lot of it starts with have a clear vision. Right. And so we have a clear vision of what we're doing. And so I kind of grew up at Apple in my engineering life. Right. And so a lot of the Apple DNA rubbed off on me. My co-founder Tim also is like a strong product guy, and so what we learned is I was taught at Apple that you don't work from building cool technology. You don't work from like come up with a cool product and think about the features you'll have in the big checkboxes and stuff like this. Because if you go talk to customers, they don't actually care about your product. They don't care about your technology. What they care about is their problems, right? And if your product can help solve their problems, well, hey, they might be interested in that, right? And so if you speak to them about the problems, if you understand and you have compassion, you understand what people are working with, then you can work backwards to building an amazing product.
So the vision
And then
starts
you
by
can work,
defining the problem.
and then you can work backwards in solving technology.
Got it.
And at Apple, like it's I think pretty famously said that for every there's 100 no's for every yes. I would refine that to say that there's 100 not yets for every yes.
Yep.
But famously, if you go back to the iPhone, for example, right, the iPhone 1, many people laughed at it because it didn't have 3G, it didn't have copy and paste, right? And then a year later, okay, finally it has 3G, but it still doesn't have copy and paste. It's a joke. Nobody will ever use this product, blah, 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 right? Well, year 3, it had copy and paste, and people stopped talking about it, right? And so being laser focused and having conviction and understanding what the core problems are and giving the team the space to be able to build the right tech is really important. Also, you come back to recruiting, you have to pay well, right? So we have to pay industry leading salaries and have good benefits and things like this. That's a big piece. We're a remote first company, and so we have to. So remote first has a very strong set of pros and cons. On the one hand, you can hire people from wherever they are, and you can attract amazing talent even if they live in strange places or unusual places. On the other hand, you have time zones. On the other hand, you have like everybody on the internet will fight if they don't understand each other, and so we've had to learn how to like have a system where we actually fly people in and we get the whole company together periodically, and then we get work groups together and we plan and execute together. And so
there's like an intimacy to the in-person brainstorming
yeah.
that I guess you lose, but maybe you don't. Maybe if you get to know each other well and you trust each other, maybe you can do that.
Well, so when the pandemic first hit, I'm curious about your experience too. The first thing I missed was having whiteboards.
Yeah.
Right. Those design discussions where like I can high intensity work through things, get things done, work through the problem of the day, understand where you're on, figure out and solve the problem and move forward.
Yeah.
But we figured out ways to work around that now with all these screen sharing and other things like that we do. The thing I miss now is sitting down at a lunch table with the team.
Yeah.
The spontaneous things like those the coffee bar things, yeah. and the bumping into each other and getting to know people outside of the transactional solve a problem over Zoom thing.
And I think there's just a lot of stuff that I'm not an expert at this. I don't know who is. Hopefully there's some people, but there's stuff that somehow is missing on Zoom. Even with the whiteboard, if you look at that, if you have a room with one person at the whiteboard and there's like 3 other people at a table, there's first of all, there's a social aspect to that where you're just shooting the shit a little bit, almost like
as people are just kind of coming in and
that, but also while like it's a breakout discussion that happens for like seconds at a time, maybe an inside joke, or it's like this interesting dynamic that happens that Zoom.
And you're bonding. Yeah.
You're bonding, but through that bonding, you get the excitement. There's certain ideas that are like complete bullshit, and you'll see that in the faces of others that you won't see necessarily on Zoom. Like something, it feels like that should be possible to do without being in person.
Well, being in person is a very different thing.
It's
worth it, but you can't always do it. And so again, we're still learning, and we're all still learning as like humanity with this new reality, right? But what we found is that getting people together, whether it be a team or the whole company or whatever, is worth the expense because people work together and are happier after that. Like it just like there's a massive period of time where you like go out and things start getting frayed, pull people together, and then you realize that we're all working together. We see things the same way. We work through the disagreement or the misunderstanding. We're talking across each other, and then you work much better together. And so things like that I think are really quite important.
What about people that are kind of specialized in very different aspects of the stack working together? What are some interesting challenges there?
Yeah, well, so there's lots of interesting people, as you can tell. I'm hard to deal with too. But
you're one of the most lovable people.
So there's different philosophies in building teams. For me, and so some people say hire 10x programmers, and that's the only thing whatever that means, right? What I believe in is building well-balanced teams that have people that are different in them. Mm-hmm. Like if you have all generals and no troops, or all troops and no generals, or you have all people that think in one way and not the other way, what you get is a very biased and skewed and weird situation where people end up being unhappy. And so what I like to do is I like to build teams of people where they're not all the same. We do have teams and they're focused on like runtime or compiler, GPU or accelerator or whatever the speciality is, but people bring a different take and have a different perspective. And I look for people that complement each other. And particularly if you look at leadership teams and things like this, you don't want everybody thinking the same way. You want people bringing different perspectives and experiences, and so I think that's really important.
So that's team, but what about building a company as ambitious as modular? So what are there
What
some
what's the
interesting
question?
lessons there?
Oh, I mean, so many. Like, so, one of the things I love about, okay, so Modular's the first company I built from scratch. Um, uh, One of the first things that was profound was I'm not cleaning up somebody else's mess,
Hmm.
right? And so if you look at,
And that's liberating to some degree.
it's super liberating, and also many of the projects I've built in the past have not been core to the product of the company.
Hmm.
Swift is not Apple's product,
Hmm.
right? MLAR is not Google's revenue machine or whatever, right? It's not. It's important, but it's like working on the accounting software for the retail giant or something, right? It's like enabling infrastructure and technology.
Hmm.
And so at Modular, the tech we're building is here to solve people's problems. Like, it is directly the thing that we're giving to people. And so this is a really big difference. And what it means for me as a leader, but also for many of our engineers, is they're working on the thing that matters.
Hmm.
And that's actually pretty, I mean, again, for compiler people and things like that, that's usually not the case, right? And so that's also pretty exciting and quite nice. But one of the ways that this manifests is it makes it easier to make decisions. And so one of the challenges I've had in other worlds is it's like, okay, well, community matters somehow for the goodness of the world, like, or open source matters theoretically, but I don't want to pay for a t-shirt,
Yeah.
right? Or some swag. Like, well, t-shirts cost $10 each. You can have 100 t-shirts for $1,000. To a megacorp, $1,000 is uncountably, can't count that low.
Yes.
Right? But justifying it and getting a t-shirt, by the way, if you'd like a t-shirt, I can give you a t-shirt.
Well, I would 100% like a t-shirt. Are you joking?
You can have a fire emoji t-shirt.
I will I will treasure this.
Is that a good
I
thing?
will pass it down to my grandchildren.
And so, it's very liberating to be able to
Modular.
decide, I think that Lex should have a t-shirt, right? And it becomes very simple because I like Lex.
this 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 is awesome.
So,
Um, so I have to ask you about the one of the interesting developments with large language models is that they're able to generate code recently really well, uh,
yes.
to a degree that maybe I don't know if you understand, but I struggle to understand because it forces me to ask questions about the nature of programming, of the nature of thought, because the language models are able to predict the kind of code I was about to write so well
Yep.
that it makes me wonder like how unique my brain is and where the valuable ideas actually come from. Like how much do I contribute in terms of ingenuity, innovation to code I write or design and that kind of stuff. When you stand on the shoulders of giants, are you really doing anything? And what LLMs are helping you do is they help you stand on the shoulders of giants when you program. There's mistakes, they're interesting that you learn from, but it would love to get your opinion first, high level,
Yeah.
of what you think about this impact of large language models when they do program synthesis, when they generate code.
Yeah. Well, so, um, I don't know where it all goes.
Yeah.
I'm an optimist, and I'm a human optimist. Right? I think that things I've seen are that a lot of the LLMs are really good at crushing leak code projects,
Hmm.
and they can reverse the linked list like crazy. Well, it turns out there's a lot of instances of that on the internet, and it's a pretty stock thing. And so, if you want to see standard questions answered, LLMs can memorize all the answers, and that can be amazing. And also, they do generalize out from that, and so there's good work on that. But I think that if you, in my experience, building something like you talk about Mojo, or you talk about these things, or you talk about building an applied solution to a problem, it's also about working with people. Right? It's about understanding the problem. What is the product that you want to build? What are the use case? What are the customers? You can't just go survey all the customers because they'll tell you that they want a faster horse.
Hmm.
Maybe they need a car, right? And so a lot of it comes into, I don't feel like we have to compete with LLMs. I think they'll help automate a ton of the mechanical stuff out of the way. And just like, I think we all try to scale through delegation and things like this, delegating rote things to an LLM, I think is an extremely valuable and approach that will help us all scale and be more productive.
But I think it's a
But-
fascinating companion.
But I'd say I don't think that means that we're going to be done with coding.
Sure, sure. But there's power in it as a companion. And
Yeah, absolutely.
so from there, I would love to zoom in onto Mojo a little bit. Do you think about that? Do you think about LLMs generating Mojo code and helping sort of like when you
Yeah.
design a new programming language? It almost seems like, man, it would be nice to sort of almost as a way to learn how I'm supposed to use this thing for them to be trained on some of the Mojo
Yeah.
code.
So I do lead an AI company, so maybe there will be a Mojo LLM at some point. But if your question is like, how do we make a language to be suitable for LLMs?
Yeah.
I think that I think the cool thing about LLMs is you don't have to, right? And so if you look at what is English or any of these other terrible languages that we as humans deal with on a continuous basis, they're never designed for machines, and yet they're the intermediate representation. They're the exchange format that we humans use to get stuff done, right? And so these programming languages, they're an intermediate representation between the human and the computer, or the human and the compiler, roughly, right? And so I think the LLMs will have no problem learning whatever keyword we pick.
Maybe the fire emoji is gonna
Oh, maybe
be
that's going to
critical.
break it. It
It's gonna
doesn't tokenize.
No, the reverse of that, it will actually enable it, because one of the issues I could see with being a superset of Python is there would be confusion about the gray area, so it would be mixing stuff. But
Well, I'm a human optimist. I'm also an LLM optimist. I think that we'll solve that problem.
we'll solve it. Yeah,
But the but you look at that and you say, okay, well, reducing the rote thing, right? It turns out compilers are very particular, and they really want things. They really want the indentation to be right. They really want the colon to be there on your else, or else it'll complain, right? I mean, compilers can do better at this, but LLMs can totally help solve that problem. And so I'm very happy about the new predictive coding and copilot type features and things like this, because I think it'll all just make us more productive.
it's still messy and fuzzy and uncertain, unpredictable. So, but is there a future you see, given how big of a leap GPT-4 was, where you start to see something like LLMs inside a compiler, or no?
I mean, you could do that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that'd be interesting.
Is that wise?
Well, I mean, it would be very expensive. So compilers run fast and they're very efficient, and LLMs are currently very expensive. There's on-device LLMs and there's other things going on, and so maybe there's an answer there. I think that one of the things that I haven't seen enough of is that, so LLMs to me are amazing when you tap into the creative potential of the hallucinations, right? And so if you're doing creative brainstorming or creative writing or things like that, the hallucinations work in your favor. If you're writing code that has to be correct because you're going to ship it in production, then maybe that's not actually a feature. And so I think that there has been research and there has been work on building algebraic reasoning systems and kind of like figuring out more things that feel like proofs. And so I think that there could be interesting work in terms of building more reliable at scale systems, and that could be interesting. But if you chase that rabbit hole down, the question then becomes, how do you express your intent to the machine? And so maybe you want an LLM to provide the spec, but you have a different kind of net that then actually implements the code.
Right. So it's to use the documentation and inspiration versus the actual implementation.
Yeah, potentially.
Since if successful, modular will be the thing that runs, I say so jokingly, our AI overlords, but AI systems that are used across, I know it's a cliche term, but Internet of Things. So across.
So I'll joke and say, like, AGI should be written in Mojo.
Yeah, AGI should be written in Mojo. You're joking, but it's also possible that it's not a joke. That a lot of the ideas behind Mojo is seems like the natural set of ideas that would enable at scale training and inference of AI systems. So just I have to ask you about the big philosophical question about human civilization. So folks like Eliezer Yudkowsky are really concerned about the threat of AI.
Yeah.
Do you think about the good and the bad that can happen at scale deployment of AI systems?
Well, so I've thought a lot about it, and there's a lot of different parts to this problem, everything from job displacement to Skynet, things like this. And so you can zoom into subparts of this problem. I'm not super optimistic about AGI being solved next year. I don't think that's going to happen personally.
So you have a kind of Zen-like calm about, is there's a nervousness because the leap of GPT-4 seemed so big.
Sure. It's
like there's some kind of transitionary period. You're thinking,
well, so I mean, there's a couple of things going on there. One is I'm sure GPT-5 and 7 and 19 will be also huge leaps. They're also getting much more expensive to run. And so there may be a limiting function in terms of just expense on the one hand, and train, like that could be a limiter that slows things down. But I think the bigger limiter is outside of, like, Skynet takes over, and I don't spend any time thinking about that, because if Skynet takes over and kills us all, then I'll be dead. So I don't worry about that. So, I mean, that's just, okay, I have other things to worry about. I'll just focus on, I'll focus and not worry about that one. But I think that the other thing I'd say is that AI moves quickly, but humans move slowly, and we adapt slowly. And so what I expect to happen is, just like any technology diffusion, like the promise and then the application takes time to roll out. And so I think that I'm not even too worried about autonomous cars defining away all the taxi drivers. Remember, autonomy was supposed to be solved by 2020?
Yeah, boy, do I remember.
So like, I think that on the one hand, we can see amazing progress, but on the other hand, we can see that, the reality is a little bit more complicated, and it may take longer to roll out than you might expect.
Well, that's in the physical space. I do think in the digital space is the stuff that's built on top of LLMs that runs, the millions of apps that could be built on top of them. and that could be run on millions of devices, millions of types of devices.
Yeah.
I just think that the rapid effect it has on human civilization could be truly transformative
Profound,
to
yeah.
it. Yeah, to what
Well,
we don't even know
well, and so
to
the
predict.
well, and there I think it depends on, are you an optimist or pessimist
Yeah.
or a masochist.
Just to clarify,
But
optimist about human civilization.
me too. And so I look at that as saying, okay, cool. What will AI do? Right. And so some people say, oh my God, it's going to destroy us all. How do we prevent that? I kind of look at it from a, is it going to unlock us all? Right. You talk about coding. Is it going to make so I don't have to do all the repetitive stuff? Well, suddenly that's a very optimistic way to look at it. And you look at what a lot of these technologies have done to improve our lives, and I want that to go faster.
What do you think the future of programming looks like in the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years?
Yeah.
With LLMs and with Mojo, with modular, like your vision for devices, the hardware to the compilers to this to the different stacks of
Yeah,
software.
yeah. Well, so what I want, I mean, coming back to my arch nemesis, right? It's complexity, right? So again, me being the optimist, if we drive down complexity, we can make these tools, these technologies, these cool hardware widgets accessible to way more people, right? And so what I'd love to see is more personalized experiences, more things, the research getting into production instead of being lost at NeurIPS, right? And so, and like these things that impact people's lives by entering products. And so one of the things that I'm a little bit concerned about is right now, the big companies are investing huge amounts of money and are driving the top line of AI capability forward really quickly. But if it means that you have to have $100 million to train a model or more, $100 billion,
Mm-hmm.
right? Well, that's going to make it very concentrated with very few people in the world that can actually do this stuff. I would much rather see lots of people across the industry be able to participate and use this. Right? And you look at this, I mean, a lot of great research has been done in the health world and looking at like detecting pathologies and doing radiology with AI and like doing all these things. Well, the problem today is that to deploy and build these systems, you have to be an expert in radiology and an expert in AI. And if we can break down the barriers so that more people can use AI techniques, and it's more like programming Python, which roughly everybody can do if they want to, right? Then I think that we'll get a lot more practical application of these techniques and a lot more nichier, cool but narrower domains. And I think that's gonna be really cool.
Do you think we'll have more or less programmers in the world than now?
Well, so I think we'll have more programmers, but they may not consider themselves to be programmers,
That'd be a different name for it.
right? I mean, do you consider somebody that uses, I think that arguably the most popular programming language is Excel,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Yep.
And so, do they consider themselves to be programmers? Maybe not. I mean, some of them make crazy macros and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
but what you mentioned Steve Jobs is it's the bicycle for the mind
Mhm.
that allows you to go faster, right? And so I think that as we look forward, right, what is AI? I look at it as hopefully a new programming paradigm. It's like object-oriented programming,
Mhm.
right? If you want to write a cat detector, you don't use for loops.
Mhm.
It turns out that's not the right tool for the job, right? And so right now, unfortunately, because I mean, it's not unfortunate, but it's just kind of where things are. AI is this weird, different thing
Mhm.
that's not integrated into programming languages and normal tool chains, and all the technology is really weird and doesn't work right, and you have to babysit it, and every time you switch hardware, it's different. It shouldn't be that way. When you change that, when you fix that, suddenly, again, the tools and technologies can be way easier to use. You can start using them for many more things, and so that's why I would be excited about.
What kind of advice could you give to somebody in high school right now, or maybe early college, who's curious about programming and feeling like the world is changing really quickly here?
Yeah, well,
What kind of stuff to learn? What kind of stuff to work on? Should they finish college? Should they go work at a company? Should they build a thing?
yeah.
What do you think?
Well, so I mean, one of the things I'd say is that you'll be most successful if you work on something you're excited by, and so don't get the book and read the book cover to cover and study and memorize and recite and flashcard, and go build something. Like, go solve a problem. Go build the thing that you want to exist. Go build an app. Go train a model. Like, go build something and actually use it and set a goal for yourself. And if you do that, then you'll, there's a success. There's the adrenaline rush. There's the achievement. There's the unlock that I think is where, if you keep setting goals and you keep doing things and building things, learning by building is really powerful. In terms of career advice, I mean, everybody's different. It's very hard to give generalized advice. I'll speak as, a compiler nerd. If everybody's going left, sometimes it's pretty cool to go right.
Yeah.
And so just because everybody's doing a thing, it doesn't mean you have to do the same thing and follow the herd. In fact, I think that sometimes the most exciting paths through life lead to being curious about things that nobody else actually focuses on, right? And it turns out that understanding deeply parts of the problem that people want to take for granted makes you extremely valuable and specialized in ways that the herd is not. And so, again, I mean, there's lots of rooms for specialization, lots of rooms for generalists. There's lots of room for different kinds and parts of the problem, but I think that it's just because everybody's doing one thing doesn't mean you should necessarily do it.
And now the herd is using Python. So if you want to be a rebel, go check out Mojo and help Chris and the rest of the world fight the arch nemesis of complexity. Because simple is beautiful.
There you go. Yeah.
Chris, you're an incredible person. You've been so kind to me ever since we met. You've been extremely supportive. I'm forever grateful for that. Thank you for being who you are, for being legit, for being kind, for fighting this really interesting problem of how to make AI accessible to a huge number of people, huge number of devices.
Yeah. Well, so Lex, you're a pretty special person too, right? And so I think that, one of the funny things about you is that besides being curious and pretty damn smart, you're actually willing to push on things. And I think that you've got an agenda to like make the world think, which I think is a pretty good agenda.
It's a pretty good one. Thank you so much for talking to it, Chris.
Yeah. Thanks, Lex.
Thanks for listening to this conversation with Chris Latner. To support this podcast, please check out our sponsors in the description. And now, let me leave you with some words from Isaac Asimov. I do not fear computers. I fear the lack of them. Thank you for listening and hope to see you next time. The following is a conversation with Bert Kreischer, a stand-up comedian, podcaster, actor, and a man they call... The following is a conversation with Sam Altman.
Are that there are going to be disinformation problems or economic shocks or something else at a level far beyond anything we're prepared for. And that doesn't require super intelligence. That doesn't require a super deep alignment problem in the machine waking up and trying to deceive us. And I don't think that gets enough attention. And to do that really well, I think we will need to expand on the GPT paradigm in pretty important ways that we're still missing ideas for. But I don't know what those ideas are. We're trying to find them.
I could argue sort of the opposite point, that you could have deep, big scientific breakthroughs with just the data that GPT is trained on. So like, I think some of it is like if you prompt it correctly.
Look, if an oracle told me far from the future that GPT-10 turned out to be a true AGI somehow, maybe just some very small new ideas, I would be like, okay, I can believe that. Not what I would have expected sitting here. Would have said a new big idea, but I can believe that.
This prompting chain, if you extend it very far and then increase at scale the number of those interactions, like what kind of, if these things start getting integrated into human society and starts building on top of each other, I mean, like, I don't think we understand what that looks like. Like you said, it's been 6 days.
The thing that I am so excited about with this is not that it's a system that kind of goes off and does its own thing, but that it's this tool that humans are using in this feedback loop. Helpful for us for a bunch of reasons. We get to, learn more about trajectories through multiple iterations. But I am excited about a world where AI is an extension of human will and a amplifier of our abilities and this most useful tool yet created. And that is certainly how people are using it. And I mean, just look at Twitter, the results are amazing. People's self-reported happiness with getting to work with this are great. So yeah, maybe we never build AGI, but we just make humans super great. Still a huge win.
Yeah, I said I'm part of those people. Like the amount, I derive a lot of happiness from programming together with GPT. Part of it is a little bit of terror.
Can you say more about that?
There's a meme I saw today that everybody's freaking out about sort of GPT taking programmer jobs. No, it's the reality is just it's going to be taking, if it's going to take your job, it means you're a shitty programmer. There's some truth to that. Maybe there's some human element that's really fundamental to the creative act, to the act of genius that is in great design that is involved in programming. And maybe I'm just really impressed by all the boilerplate, but that I don't see as boilerplate, but is actually pretty boilerplate.
Yeah, it may be that you create in a day of programming, you have one really important idea.
Yeah. And that's the contribution.
That's the contribution. And there may be, I think we're going to find, so I suspect that is happening with great programmers and that GPT-like models are far away from that one thing, even though they're going to automate a lot of other programming. But again, most programmers have some sense of, anxiety about what the future is going to look like, but mostly they're like, this is amazing. I am 10 times more productive. Yeah. Don't ever take this away from me. There's not a lot of people that use it and say turn this off,
Yeah. So I think, so to speak to the psychology of terror is more like this is awesome. This is too awesome. I'm
It's too
scared.
awesome. Yeah. There is a little
This
bit of
coffee tastes too good.
You know, when Kasparov lost to Deep Blue, somebody said, and maybe it was him, that like chess is over now. If an AI can beat a human at chess, then no one's going to bother to keep playing, right? Because like, what's the purpose of us or whatever? That was 30 years ago, 25 years ago, something like that. I believe that chess has never been more popular than it is right now. And people keep wanting to play and wanting to watch. And by the way, we don't watch two AIs play each other, which would be a far better game in some sense than whatever else. But that's not what we choose to do. Like, we are somehow much more interested in what humans do in this sense, and whether or not Magnus loses to that kid than what happens when two much, much better AIs play each other.
Well, actually, when two AIs play each other, it's not a better game by our definition of better.
Because we just can't understand it.
No, I think they just draw each other. I think the human flaws, and this might apply across the spectrum here, with AIs will make life way better, but we'll still want drama.
We will. That's
We'll
for sure.
still want imperfection and flaws, and AI will not have as much of that.
Look, I mean, I hate to sound like utopic tech bro here, but if you'll excuse me for 3 seconds, like the level of the increase in quality of life that AI can deliver is extraordinary. We can make the world amazing, and we can make people's lives amazing. We can cure diseases. We can increase material wealth. We can like help people be happier, more fulfilled, all of these sorts of things. And then people are like, oh, well, no one is going to work. But people want status. People want drama. People want new things. People want to create. People want to like feel useful. People want to do all these things. And we're just going to find new and different ways to do them, even in a vastly better, like unimaginably good standard of living world.
But that world, the positive trajectories with AI, that world is with an AI that's aligned with humans and doesn't hurt, doesn't limit, doesn't try to get rid of humans. And there's some folks who consider all the different problems with a super intelligent AI system. So one of them is Eliezer Yudkowsky. He warns that AI will likely kill all humans. And there's a bunch of different cases, but I think one way to summarize it is that it's almost the way we build AGI.
I think it's part of the way. I think we need other super important things.
This is philosophizing a little bit. Like, what kind of components do you think, in a technical sense or a poetic sense, does it need to have a body that it can experience the world directly?
I don't think it needs that. But I wouldn't say any of this stuff with certainty. Like, we're deep into the unknown here. For me, a system that cannot go
A large language model experience
to do that really well, I think we will need to expand on the GPT paradigm in pretty important ways that we're still missing ideas.
In a technical sense or a poetic sense, does it need to have a body that it can experience the world directly?
I don't think it needs that. But I wouldn't say any of this stuff with certainty. Like, we're deep into the unknown here. For me, a system that cannot go significantly add to the sum total of scientific knowledge we have access to, kind of discover, invent, whatever you want to call it, new fundamental science, is not a super intelligence. And to do that really well, I think we will need to expand on the GPT paradigm in pretty important ways that we're still missing ideas for. But I don't know what those ideas are. We're trying to find them.
I could argue sort of the opposite point, that you could have deep, big scientific breakthroughs with just the data that GPT is trained on. So, like, I think some of it is, like, if you prompt it correctly.
Look, if an oracle told me far from the future that GPT-10 turned out to be a true AGI somehow, maybe just some very small new ideas, I would be like, okay, I can believe that. Not what I would have expected sitting here. I would have said a new big idea, but I can believe that.
This prompting chain, if you extend it very far and then increase at scale the number of those interactions, like, what kind of, if these things start getting integrated into human society and starts building on top of each other, I mean, like, I don't think we understand what that looks like. It's, like you said, it's been 6 days.
The thing that I am so excited about with this is not that it's a system that kind of goes off and does its own thing, but that it's this tool that humans are using in this feedback loop. Helpful for us for a bunch of reasons. We get to, learn more about trajectories through multiple iterations. But I am excited about a world where AI is an extension of human will and a amplifier of our abilities, and this, like, most useful tool yet created. And that is certainly how people are using it. And I mean, just like, look at Twitter, like the results are amazing. People's like self-reported happiness with getting to work with this are great. So yeah, like, maybe we never build AGI, but we just make humans super great. Still a huge win.
Yeah, I said I'm part of those people. Like the amount, I derive a lot of happiness from programming together with GPT. Part of it is a little bit of terror.
Can you say more about that?
There's a meme I saw today that everybody's freaking out about sort of GPT taking programmer jobs. No, it's the reality is just it's going to be taking, like, if it's going to take your job, it means you're a shitty programmer. There's some truth to that. Maybe there's some human element that's really fundamental to the creative act, to the act of genius that is in great design that is involved in programming. And maybe I'm just really impressed by all the boilerplate, but that I don't see as boilerplate, but is actually pretty boilerplate.
Yeah, it may be that you create, like, you know, in a day of programming, you have one really important idea.
Yeah. And that's the contribution.
That's the contribution. And there may be, like, I think we're going to find, so I suspect that is happening with great programmers, and that GPT-like models are far away from that one thing, even though they're going to automate a lot of other programming. But again, most programmers have some sense of, you know, anxiety about what the future is going to look like, but mostly they're like, this is amazing. I am 10 times more productive. Yeah. Don't ever take this away from me. There's not a lot of people that use it and say, like, turn this off, you know?
Yeah. So I think, so to speak to the psychology of terror is more like, this is awesome. This is too awesome. I'm scared.
Too awesome. Yeah. There is a little bit of
coffee tastes too good.
You know, when Kasparov lost to Deep Blue, somebody said, and maybe it was him, that, like, chess is over now. Yeah. If an AI can beat a human at chess, then no one's going to bother to keep playing, right? Because, like, what's the purpose of us or whatever? That was 30 years ago, 25 years ago, something like that. I believe that chess has never been more popular than it is right now. And people keep wanting to play and wanting to watch. And by the way, we don't watch two AIs play each other, which would be a far better game in some sense than whatever else. But that's not what we choose to do. Like, we are somehow much more interested in what humans do in this sense, and whether or not Magnus loses to that kid than what happens when two much, much better AIs play each other.
Well, actually, when two AIs play each other, it's not a better game by our definition of better.
Because we just can't understand it.
No, I think they just draw each other. I think the human flaws, and this might apply across the spectrum here, with AIs will make life way better, but we'll still want drama.
We will. That's for sure.
We'll still want imperfection and flaws, and AI will not have as much of that.
Look, I mean, I hate to sound like utopic tech bro here, but if you'll excuse me for 3 seconds, like, the level of the increase in quality of life that AI can deliver is extraordinary. We can make the world amazing, and we can make people's lives amazing. We can cure diseases. We can increase material wealth. We can, like, help people be happier, more fulfilled, all of these sorts of things. And then people are like, oh, well, no one is going to work. But people want status. People want drama. People want new things. People want to create. People want to, like, feel useful. People want to do all these things. And we're just going to find new and different ways to do them, even in a vastly better, like, unimaginably good standard of living world.
But that world, the positive trajectories with AI, that world is with an AI that's aligned with humans and doesn't hurt, doesn't limit, doesn't try to get rid of humans. And there's some folks who consider all the different problems with a super intelligent AI system. So one of them is Eliezer Yudkowsky. He warns that AI will likely kill all humans. And there's a bunch of different cases, but I think one way to summarize it is that it's almost impossible to keep AI aligned as it becomes super intelligent. Can you steel man the case for that? And to what degree do you disagree with that trajectory?
So first of all, I will say I think that there's some chance of that. And it's really important to acknowledge it, because if we don't talk about it, if we don't treat it as potentially real, we won't put enough effort into solving it. And I think we do have to discover new techniques to be able to solve it. I think a lot of the predictions, this is true for any new field, but a lot of the predictions about AI in terms of capabilities, in terms of what the safety challenges and the easy parts are going to be, have turned out to be wrong. The only way I know how to solve a problem like this is iterating our way through it, learning early, and limiting the number of one shot to get it right scenarios that we have. To Steelman, well, I can't just pick like one AI safety case or AI alignment case, but I think Eliezer wrote a really great blog post. I think some of his work has been sort of somewhat difficult to follow, or had what I view as, like, quite significant logical flaws. But he wrote this one blog post outlining why he believed that alignment was such a hard problem, that I thought was Again, don't agree with a lot of it, but well-reasoned and thoughtful and very worth reading. So I think I'd point people to that as the Steelman.
Yeah, and I'll also have a conversation with him. There is some aspect, and I'm torn here because it's difficult to reason about the exponential improvement of technology. But also, I've seen time and time again how transparent and iterative trying out, as you improve the technology, trying it out, releasing it, testing it, how that can improve your understanding of the technology. In such that the philosophy of how to do, for example, safety of any kind of technology, but AI safety, gets adjusted over time rapidly.
A lot of the formative AI safety work was done before people even believed in deep learning, and certainly before people believed in large language models. And I don't think it's like updated enough given everything we've learned now and everything we will learn going forward. So I think it's got to be this very tight feedback loop. I think the theory does play a real role, of course, but continuing to learn what we learn from how the technology trajectory goes is quite important. I think now is a very good time, and we're trying to figure out how to do this, to significantly ramp up technical alignment work. I think we have new tools, we have new understanding, and there's a lot of work that's important to do that we can do now.
So one of the main concerns here is something called AI takeoff or fast takeoff, that the exponential improvement will be really fast to where
Like in days.
in days, yeah. I mean, this is a pretty serious, or at least to me, it's become more of a serious concern. Just how amazing ChatGPT turned out to be, and then the improvement in GPT-4,
Yeah.
almost like to where it surprised everyone. Seemingly, you can correct me, including you.
So GPT-4 has not surprised me at all in terms of reception there. ChatGPT surprised us a little bit, but I still was like advocating that we do it because I thought it was going to do really great.
Yeah.
So like, maybe I thought it would have been like the 10th fastest growing product in history and not the number one fastest. Like, okay, I think it's like hard. You should never kind of assume something's going to be like the most successful product launch ever. But we thought it was, or at least many of us thought it was going to be really good. GPT-4 has weirdly not been that much of an update for most people. They're like, oh, it's better than 3.5, but I thought it was going to be better than 3.5, and it's cool. But this is like, someone said to me over the weekend, you shipped an AGI, and I somehow like am just going about my daily life, and I'm not that impressed. And I obviously don't think we shipped an AGI, but I get the point, and the world is continuing on.
When you build, or somebody builds an artificial general intelligence, would that be fast or slow? Would we know it's happening or not? Would we go about our day on the weekend or not?
So I'll come back to the would we go about our day or not thing. I think there's like a bunch of interesting lessons from COVID and the UFO videos and a whole bunch of other stuff that we can talk to there.
Yeah.
But on the takeoff question, if we imagine a 2x2 matrix of short timelines till AGI starts, long timelines till AGI starts, slow takeoff, fast takeoff, do you have an instinct on what you think the safest quadrant would be?
So the different options are like next year.
Yeah. Say the takeoff, we start the takeoff period.
Yep.
Next year or in 20 years.
20 years.
And then it takes 1 year or 10 years. Well, you can even say 1 year or 5 years, whatever you want for the takeoff.
I feel like now is safer.
So do I. So I'm in the
longer now.
I'm in the slow takeoff short timelines is the most likely good world. And we optimize the company to have maximum impact in that world, to try to push for that kind of a world. And the decisions that we make are, there's like probability masses, but weighted towards that. And I think I'm very afraid of the fast takeoffs. I think in the longer timelines, it's harder to have a slow takeoff. There's a bunch of other problems too. But that's what we're trying to do. Do you think GPT-4 is an AGI?
I think if it is, just like with the UFO videos, we wouldn't know immediately. I think it's actually hard to know that. I've been thinking, I've been playing with GPT-4 and thinking, how would I know if it's an AGI or not? Because I think, in terms of, to put it in a different way, how much of AGI is the interface I have with the thing, and how much of it is the actual wisdom inside of it? Like, part of me thinks that you can have a model that's capable of super intelligence, and it just hasn't been quite unlocked. What I saw with ChatGPT, just doing that little bit of RL with human feedback makes the thing somehow much more impressive, much more usable. So maybe if you have a few more tricks, like you said, there's like hundreds of tricks inside OpenAI, a few more tricks, and all of a sudden, holy shit, this thing.
So I think that GPT-4, although quite impressive, is definitely not an AGI. But isn't it remarkable we're having this debate?
Yeah. So what's your intuition why it's not?
I think we're getting into the phase where specific definitions of AGI really matter.
Yeah.
Or we just say, you know, I know it when I see it, and I'm not even going to bother with the definition. But under the I know it when I see it, it doesn't feel that close to me. Like if I were reading a sci-fi book and there was a character that was an AGI and that character was GPT-4, I'd be like, well, this is a shitty book. Like, you know, that's not very cool. Like I would have hoped we had done better.
To me, some of the human factors are important here. Do you think GPT-4 is conscious?
I think no, but
I asked GPT-4, and of course it says no.
do you think GPT-4 is conscious?
I think it knows how to fake consciousness. Yes.
How to fake consciousness?
Yeah. If you provide the right interface and the right prompts.
It definitely can answer as if it were.
Yeah. And then it starts getting weird. It's like, what is the difference between pretending to be conscious and conscious? If
I mean,
you
look,
trick me.
you don't know, obviously, we can go to like the freshman year dorm late at Saturday night kind of thing. You don't know that you're not a GPT-4 rollout in some advanced simulation.
Yeah. Yes.
So if we're willing to go to that level, sure.
I live in that level. Well, but that's an important level. That's a really important level, because one of the things that makes it not conscious is declaring that it's a computer program, therefore it can't be conscious, so I'm not even going to acknowledge it. But that just puts it in the category of other. I believe AI can be conscious. So then the question is, what would it look like when it's conscious? What would it behave like? And it would probably say things like, first of all, I'm conscious. Second of all, display capability of suffering, an understanding of self, of having some memory of itself and maybe interactions with you. Maybe there's a personalization aspect to it. And I think all of those capabilities are interface capabilities, not fundamental aspects of the actual knowledge inside the neural net.
Maybe I can just share a few like disconnected thoughts here.
Sure.
But I'll tell you something that Ilya said to me once a long time ago that has like stuck in my head.
Ilya Sutskever.
Yes, my co-founder and the chief scientist of OpenAI and sort of legend in the field. We were talking about how you would know if a model were conscious or not. And I've heard many ideas thrown around, but he said one that I think is interesting. If you trained a model on a data set that you were extremely careful to have no mentions of consciousness or anything close to it in the training process, like not only was the word never there, but nothing about the sort of subjective experience of it or related concepts. And then you started talking to that model about, here are some things that you weren't trained about. And for most of them, the model was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But then you asked it, you sort of described the experience, the subjective experience of consciousness, and the model immediately responded, unlike the other questions, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. That would update me somewhat.
I don't know, because that's more in the space of facts versus like emotions.
I don't think consciousness is an emotion.
I think consciousness is the ability to sort of experience this world really deeply. There's a movie called Ex Machina.
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
You haven't seen it?
No.
The director, Alex Garland, who had a conversation. So it's where AGI system is built, embodied in the body of a woman. And something he doesn't make explicit, but he said he put in the movie without describing why. But at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, when the AI escapes, the woman escapes, she smiles for nobody, for no audience. She smiles at at the freedom she's experiencing. I don't know, anthropomorphizing. But he said the smile to me was was passing the Turing test for consciousness. That you smile for no audience, you smile for yourself. It's an interesting thought. It's like you taking an experience for the experience's sake. I don't know. That seemed more like consciousness versus the ability to convince somebody else that you're conscious. And that feels more like a realm of emotion versus facts. But yes, if it knows.
Yeah. So I think there's many other tests like that we could look at too. But, my personal beliefs, consciousness is something very strange is going on. Let's say that.
Do you think it's attached to the particular medium of the human brain? Do you think an AI can be conscious?
I'm certainly willing to believe that consciousness is somehow the fundamental substrate and we're all just in the dream or the simulation or whatever. Yeah. I think it's interesting how much sort of the Silicon Valley religion of the simulation has gotten close to like Brahman and how little space there is between them, but from these very different directions. So like maybe that's what's going on. But if it is like physical reality as we understand it and all of the rules of the game are what we think they are, then there's something, I still think it's something very strange.
Just to linger on the alignment problem a little bit, maybe the control problem. What are the different ways you think AGI might go wrong that concern you? You said that fear, a little bit of fear is very appropriate here. You've been very transparent about being mostly excited, but also scared.
I think it's weird when people think it's like a big dunk that I say like I'm a little bit afraid. And I think it'd be crazy not to be a little bit afraid. And I empathize with people who are a lot afraid.
What do you think about that moment of a system becoming super intelligent? Do you think you would know?
The current worries that I have are that there are going to be disinformation problems or economic shocks or something else at a level far beyond anything we're prepared for. And that doesn't require super intelligence. That doesn't require a super deep alignment problem in the machine waking up and trying to deceive us. And I don't think that gets enough attention. I mean, it's starting to get more, I guess.
So these systems deployed at scale can shift the winds of geopolitics and so on.
How would we know if, like, on Twitter, we were mostly having, like, LLMs direct the whatever's flowing through that hive mind?
Yeah, on Twitter and then perhaps beyond.
And then as on Twitter, so everywhere else eventually.
Yeah, how would we know?
My statement is we wouldn't. And that's a real danger.
How do you prevent that danger?
I think there's a lot of things you can try. But at this point, it is a certainty. There are soon going to be a lot of capable open source LLMs with very few to no safety controls on them. And so you can try with regulatory approaches. You can try with using more powerful AIs to detect this stuff happening. I'd like us to start trying a lot of things very soon.
How do you, under this pressure that there's going to be a lot of open source, there's going to be a lot of large language models, under this pressure, how do you continue prioritizing safety? Versus, there's several pressures. So one of them is a market-driven pressure from other companies, Google, Apple, Meta, and smaller companies. How do you resist the pressure from that? Or how do you navigate that pressure?
You stick with what you believe in. You stick to your mission. I'm sure people will get ahead of us in all sorts of ways and take shortcuts we're not going to take. And we just aren't going to do that.
How do you outcompete them?
I think there's going to be many AGIs in the world, so we don't have to outcompete everyone. We're going to contribute one. Other people are going to contribute some. I think I think multiple AGIs in the world with some differences in how they're built and what they do and what they're focused on, I think that's good. We have a very unusual structure, so we don't have this incentive to capture unlimited value. I worry about the people who do, but hopefully it's all going to work out. But we're a weird org, and we're good at resisting pressure. Like, we have been a misunderstood and badly mocked org for a long time. Like, when we started, we announced the org at the end of 2015 and said we were going to work on AGI. Like, people thought we were batshit insane.
Yeah.
I remember at the time a eminent AI scientist at a large industrial AI lab was DMing individual reporters, being like, these people aren't very good, and it's ridiculous to talk about AGI, and I can't believe you're giving them time of day. And it's that was the level of pettiness and rancor in the field at a new group of people saying we're going to try to build AGI.
So OpenAI and DeepMind was a small collection of folks who were brave enough to talk about AGI in the face of mockery.
We don't get mocked as much now.
We don't get mocked as much now. So speaking about the structure of the org, so OpenAI stopped being nonprofit or split up in 20. Can you describe that whole process?
Yeah, so we started as a nonprofit. We learned early on that we were going to need far more capital than we were able to raise as a nonprofit. Our nonprofit is still fully in charge. There is a subsidiary capped profit so that our investors and employees can earn a certain fixed return. And then beyond that, everything else flows to the nonprofit. And the nonprofit is in voting control, lets us make a bunch of non-standard decisions, can cancel equity, can do a whole bunch of other things, can let us merge with another org, protects us from making decisions that are not in any shareholders' interest. So I think it's a structure that has been important to a lot of the decisions we've made.
What went into that decision process for taking a leap from nonprofit to capped for-profit? What are the pros and cons you were deciding at the time? I mean, this was 2019.
It was really to do what we needed to go do. We had tried and failed enough to raise the money as a nonprofit. We didn't see a path forward there. So we needed some of the benefits of capitalism, but not too much. I remember at the time someone said, as a nonprofit, not enough will happen. As a for-profit, too much will happen. So we need this sort of strange intermediate.
But you kind of had this offhand comment of you worry about the uncapped companies that play with AGI. Can you elaborate on the worry here? Because AGI, out of all the technologies we have in our hands, has the potential to make, the cap is 100x for OpenAI.
It started as that. It's much, much lower for new investors now.
AGI can make a lot more than 100x.
For sure.
So how do you how do you compete? Stepping outside of OpenAI, how do you look at a world where Google is playing, where Apple and Meta are playing?
We can't control what other people are going to do. We can try to build something and talk about it and influence others and provide value and good systems for the world, but they're going to do what they're going to do. Now, I think right now there's extremely fast and not super deliberate motion inside of some of these companies. But already, I think people are, as they see the rate of progress, already people are grappling with what's at stake here. And I think the better angels are going to win out.
Can you elaborate on that? The better angels of individuals? The individuals within
and
the
companies. But, the incentives of capitalism to create and capture unlimited value, I'm a little afraid of. But again, no, I think no one wants to destroy the world. No one except saying today I want to destroy the world. So we've got the Moloch problem. On the other hand, we've got people who are very aware of that. And I think a lot of healthy conversation about how can we collaborate to minimize some of these very scary downsides.
Well, nobody wants to destroy the world. Let me ask you a tough question. So you are very likely to be one of, not the person that creates AGI.
One of. And even then, we're on a team of many. Yep. There'll be many teams.
But
several teams.
A small number of people, nevertheless, relative.
I do think it's strange that it's maybe a few tens of thousands of people in the world, a few thousands of people in the world.
But there will be a room with a few folks who are holy shit.
That happens more often than you would think now.
I understand this. I understand this.
But yes, there will be more such rooms.
Which is a beautiful place to be in the world. Terrifying, but mostly beautiful. So that might make you and a handful of folks the most powerful humans on Earth. Do you worry that power might corrupt you?
For sure. Look, I think you want decisions about this technology, and certainly decisions about who is running this technology, to become increasingly democratic over time. We haven't figured out quite how to do this, but part of the reason for deploying like this is to get the world to have time to adapt and to reflect and to think about this, to pass regulation, for institutions to come up with new norms, for the people working on it together. Like, that is a huge part of why we deploy, even though many of the AI safety people you referenced earlier think it's really bad. Even they acknowledge that this is like of some benefit. But I think any version of one person is in control of this is really bad.
So trying to distribute the power.
I don't have, and I don't want like any like super voting power or any special like the, you know, I have no like control of the board or anything like that of OpenAI.
But AGI, if created, has a lot of power.
How do you think we're doing? Like, honest, how do you think we're doing so far? Like, how do you think our decisions are? Like, do you think we're making things net better, worse? What can we do better?
Well, the things I really like, because I know a lot of folks at OpenAI, the things I really like is the transparency, everything you're saying, which is like failing publicly, writing papers, releasing different kinds of information about the safety concerns involved, doing it out in the open is great. Because especially in contrast to some other companies, they're not doing that. They're being more closed. That said, you could be more open.
Do you think we should open source GPT-4?
My personal opinion, because I know people at OpenAI, is no.
What does knowing the people at OpenAI have to do with it?
Because I know they're good people. I know a lot of people. I know they're good human beings. From a perspective of people that don't know the human beings, there's a concern of a super powerful technology in the hands of a few that's closed.
It's closed in some sense, but we give more access to it.
Yeah.
Than, and like, if this had just been Google's game, I feel it's very unlikely that anyone would have put this API out. There's PR risk with it.
Yeah.
Like, I get personal threats because of it all the time. I think most companies wouldn't have done this. So maybe we didn't go as open as people wanted, but like, we've distributed it pretty broadly.
You personally and OpenAI's culture is not so like nervous about PR risk and all that kind of stuff. You're more nervous about the risk of the actual technology, and you reveal that. So the nervousness that people have is because it's such early days of the technology, is that you will close off over time, because more and more powerful. My nervousness is you get attacked so much by fear-mongering clickbait journalism that you're like, why the hell do I need to deal with this?
I think the clickbait journalism bothers you more than it bothers me.
No, I'm third person bothered. Like,
I appreciate that. Like, I feel all right about it. Of all the things I lose sleep over, it's not high on the list.
Because it's important. There's a handful of companies, a handful of folks that are really pushing this forward. They're amazing folks, and I don't want them to become cynical about the rest of the world.
I think people at OpenAI feel the weight of responsibility of what we're doing. And yeah, it would be nice if, like, you know, journalists were nicer to us and Twitter trolls gave us more benefit of the doubt. But like, I think we have a lot of resolve in what we're doing and why, and the importance of it. But I really would love, and I ask this like of a lot of people, not just if cameras are rolling, like any feedback you've got for how we can be doing better. We're in uncharted waters here. Talking to smart people is how we figure out what to do better.
How do you take feedback? Do you take feedback from Twitter also? Because the waterfall.
My Twitter is unreadable.
Yeah.
So sometimes I do. I can like take a sample, like a cup out of the waterfall. But I mostly take it from conversations like this.
Speaking of feedback, somebody you know well, you work together closely on some of the ideas behind OpenAI is Elon Musk. You have agreed on a lot of things. You've disagreed on some things. What have been some interesting things you've agreed and disagreed on? Speaking of fun debate on Twitter.
I think we agree on the magnitude of the downside of AGI and the need to get not only safety right, but get to a world where people are much better off because AGI exists than if AGI had never been built.
Yeah. What do you disagree on?
Elon is obviously attacking us some on Twitter right now on a few different vectors, and I have empathy because I believe he is, understandably so, really stressed about AGI safety. I'm sure there are some other motivations going on too, but that's definitely one of them. I saw this video of Elon a long time ago talking about SpaceX. Maybe it was on some news show, and a lot of early pioneers in space were really bashing SpaceX and maybe Elon too. And he was visibly very hurt by that and said, you know, those guys are heroes of mine and I sucks and I wish they would see how hard we're trying. I definitely grew up with Elon as a hero of mine. You know, despite him being a jerk on Twitter or whatever, I'm happy he exists in the world. But I wish he would do more to look at the hard work we're doing to get this stuff right.
A little bit more love. What do you admire in the name of love about Elon Musk?
I mean, so much, right? Like he has driven the world forward in important ways. I think we will get to electric vehicles much faster than we would have if he didn't exist. I think we'll get to space much faster than we would have if he didn't exist. And as a sort of like citizen of the world, I'm very appreciative of that. Also, like being a jerk on Twitter aside, in many instances, he's like a very funny and warm guy.
And some of the jerk on Twitter thing, as a fan of humanity laid out in its full complexity and beauty, I enjoy the tension of ideas expressed. So, I earlier said that I admire how transparent you are, but I like how the battles are happening before our eyes, as opposed to everybody closing off inside boardrooms. It's all laid out.
Maybe I should hit back, and maybe someday I will, but it's not like my normal style.
It's all fascinating to watch, and I think both of you are brilliant people and have early on for a long time really cared about AGI and had great concerns about AGI, but a great hope for AGI. And that's cool to see these big minds having those discussions, even if they're tense at times. I think it was Elon that said that GPT is too woke. Is GPT too woke? Can you still make the case that it is and not? This is going to our question about bias.
Honestly, I barely know what woke means anymore. I did for a while, and I feel like the word is morphed. So I will say I think it was too biased, and will always be. There will be no one version of GPT that the world ever agrees is unbiased. What I think is we've made a lot. Like, again, even some of our harshest critics have gone off and been tweeting about 3.5 to 4 comparisons and being like, wow, these people really got a lot better. Not that they don't have more work to do, and we certainly do, but I appreciate critics who display intellectual honesty like that.
Yeah.
And there's been more of that than I would have thought. We will try to get the default version to be as neutral as possible, but as neutral as possible is not that neutral if you have to do it, again, for more than one person. And so this is where more steerability, more control in the hands of the user, the system message in particular, is, I think, the real path forward. And as you pointed out, these nuanced answers to look at something from several angles.
Yeah, it's really, really fascinating. It's really fascinating. Is there something to be said about the employees of a company affecting the bias of the system?
100%. We try to avoid the SF groupthink bubble. It's harder to avoid the AI groupthink bubble. That follows you everywhere.
There's all kinds of bubbles we live in.
100%.
Yeah.
I'm going on like a around the world user tour soon for a month to just go like talk to our users in different cities. That's definitely one of them. I saw this video of Elon a long time ago talking about SpaceX. Maybe it was on some news show, and a lot of early pioneers in space were really bashing SpaceX and maybe Elon too. And he was visibly very hurt by that and said, those guys are heroes of mine, and I sucks, and I wish they would see how hard we're trying. I definitely grew up with Elon as a hero of mine. Despite him being a jerk on Twitter, whatever, I'm happy he exists in the world. But I wish he would do more to look at the hard work we're doing to get this stuff right.
A little bit more love. What do you admire in the name of love about Elon Musk?
I mean, so much, right? Like he has driven the world forward in important ways. I think we will get to electric vehicles much faster than we would have if he didn't exist. I think we'll get to space much faster than we would have if he didn't exist. And as a sort of like citizen of the world, I'm very appreciative of that. Also, like being a jerk on Twitter aside, in many instances, he's like a very funny and warm guy.
And some of the jerk on Twitter thing, as a fan of humanity laid out in its full complexity and beauty, I enjoy the tension of ideas expressed. So, I earlier said that I admire how transparent you are, but I like how the battles are happening before our eyes, as opposed to everybody closing off inside boardrooms. It's all laid out.
Maybe I should hit back, and maybe someday I will, but it's not like my normal style.
It's all fascinating to watch, and I think both of you are brilliant people and have early on for a long time really cared about AGI and had great concerns about AGI, but a great hope for AGI. And that's cool to see these big minds having those discussions, even if they're tense at times. I think it was Elon that said that GPT is too woke. Is GPT too woke? Can you still make the case that it is and not? This is going to our question about bias.
Honestly, I barely know what woke means anymore. I did for a while, and I feel like the word is morphed. So I will say I think it was too biased, and will always be, there will be no one version of GPT that the world ever agrees is unbiased. What I think is we've made a lot, like, again, even some of our harshest critics have gone off and been tweeting about 3.5 to 4 comparisons and being like, wow, these people really got a lot better. Not that they don't have more work to do, and we certainly do, but I appreciate critics who display intellectual honesty like that.
Yeah.
And there's been more of that than I would have thought. We will try to get the default version to be as neutral as possible, but as neutral as possible is not that neutral if you have to do it, again, for more than one person. And so this is where more steerability, more control in the hands of the user, the system message in particular, is, I think, the real path forward. And as you pointed out, these nuanced answers to look at something from several angles.
Yeah, it's really, really fascinating. It's really fascinating. Is there something to be said about the employees of a company affecting the bias of the system?
100%. We try to avoid the SF groupthink bubble. It's harder to avoid the AI groupthink bubble. That follows you everywhere.
There's all kinds of bubbles we live in.
100%.
Yeah.
I'm going on like a around the world user tour soon for a month to just go like talk to our users in different cities. And I can like feel how much I'm craving doing that because I haven't done anything like that since in years. I used to do that more for YC. And to go talk to people in super different contexts. And it doesn't work over the internet. Like to go show up in person and like sit down and like go to the bars they go to and kind of like walk through the city like they do. You learn so much and get out of the bubble so much. I think we are much better than any other company I know of in San Francisco for not falling into the kind of like SF craziness, but I'm sure we're still pretty deeply in it.
But is it possible to separate the bias of the model versus the bias of the employees?
The bias I'm most nervous about is the bias of the human feedback raters.
So what's the selection of the human? Is there something you could speak to at a high level about the selection of the human raters?
This is the part that we understand the least well. We're great at the pre-training machinery. We're now trying to figure out how we're going to select those people, how we'll like verify that we get a representative sample, how we'll do different ones for different places, but we don't have that functionality built out yet.
Such a fascinating science.
You clearly don't want like all American elite university students giving you your labels.
Well, see, it's not about.
Sorry, I just can never resist that dig.
Yes, nice. But it's so that's a good. There's a million heuristics you can use. That's to me that's a shallow heuristic because like any one kind of category of human that you would think would have certain beliefs might actually be really open-minded in an interesting way. So you have to like optimize for how good you are actually answering at doing these kinds of rating tasks, how good you are at empathizing with an experience of other humans.
That's a big one.
Like and be able to actually like, what does the worldview look like for all kinds of groups of people that would answer this differently? I mean, I have to do that constantly. So like,
you've asked this a few times, but it's something I often do. You know, I ask people in an interview or whatever to steelman the beliefs of someone they really disagree with. And the inability of a lot of people to even pretend like they're willing to do that is remarkable.
Yeah. What I find, unfortunately, ever since COVID, even more so, that there's almost an emotional barrier. It's not even an intellectual barrier. Before they even get to the intellectual, there's an emotional barrier that says no. Anyone who might possibly believe X, they're an idiot, they're evil, they're malevolent, anything you want to assign. And it's like they're not even like loading in the data into their head.
Look, I think we'll find out that we can make GPT systems way less biased than any human.
Yeah. So hopefully without the...
because there won't be that emotional load there.
Yeah, the emotional load. But there might be pressure. There might be political pressure.
Oh, there might be pressure to make a biased system. What I meant is the technology, I think, will be capable of being much less biased.
Do you worry about pressures from outside sources, from society, from politicians, from money sources?
I both worry about it and want it. Like, you know, to the point of we're in this bubble and we shouldn't make all these decisions. Like, we want society to have a huge degree of input here. That is pressure in some point, in some way.
Well, there's that's what, like, to some degree, Twitter files have revealed that there was pressure from different organizations. You can see in the pandemic where the CDC or some other government organization might put pressure on, we're not really sure what's true, but it's very unsafe to have these kinds of nuanced conversations now. So let's censor all topics. So, and you get a lot of those emails, like, emails, all different kinds of people reaching out at different places to put subtle, indirect pressure, direct pressure, financial, political pressure, all that kind of stuff. Like, how do you survive that? How much do you worry about that if GPT continues to get more and more intelligent and a source of information and knowledge for human civilization?
I think there's like a lot of like quirks about me that make me not a great CEO for OpenAI, but a thing in the positive column is I think I am relatively good at not being affected by pressure for the sake of pressure.
By the way, beautiful statement of humility. But I have to ask, what's in the negative column?
I mean,
Too long a list?
no,
Or
no, I'm trying. What's a good one? I mean, I think I'm not a great like spokesperson for the AI movement. I'll say that. I think there could be like a more like, there could be someone who enjoyed it more. There could be someone who's like much more charismatic. There could be someone who like connects better, I think, with people than I do.
I'm with Chomsky on this. I think charisma is a dangerous thing. I think flaws in communication style, I think, is a feature, not a bug in general. At least for humans. At least for humans in power.
I think I have like more serious problems than that one. I think I'm like pretty disconnected from like the reality of life for most people, and trying to really not just like empathize with, but internalize what the impact on people that AGI is going to have. I probably like feel that less than other people would.
That's really well put. And you said like you're going to travel across the world to
Yeah, I'm excited for
to
that.
empathize with different users.
Not to empathize, just to like, I want to just like buy our users, our developers, our users a drink and say like, tell us what you'd like to change. And I think one of the things we are not as good at a company as I would like is to be a really user-centric company. And I feel like by the time it gets filtered to me, it's like totally meaningless.
Mhm.
So I really just want to go talk to a lot of our users in very different contexts.
But like you said, a drink in person, because I haven't actually found the right words for it, but I was a little afraid with the programming
Yeah,
emotionally. I don't think it makes any sense.
there is a real limbic response there.
GPT makes me nervous about the future, not in an AI safety way, but like
What am I gonna do?
change,
Yeah, change.
change, and like there's a nervousness about change. And
More nervous than excited.
if I take away the fact that I'm an AI person and just a programmer,
Yeah.
more excited, but still nervous. Like, yeah, nervous in brief moments, especially when sleep deprived. But there's a nervousness there.
People who say they're not nervous, I that's hard for me to believe.
But you're right. It's excited. It's nervous for change. Nervous whenever there's significant, exciting kind of change. Um, I've recently started using. I've been an Emacs person for a very long time, and I switched to VS Code as
Or
a.
Copilot?
That was one of the big
Cool.
Reasons, because like this is where a lot of active development. Of course, you can probably do Copilot inside Emacs. I mean, I'm sure.
VS Code is also pretty good.
Yeah, there's a lot of like little things and big things that are just really good about VS Code. So I can happily report, and all the Vim people are just going nuts. But I'm very happy. It was a very happy decision.
That's it.
But there was a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of nervousness about it. There's fear and so on about taking that leap, and that's obviously a tiny leap. But even just a leap to actively using Copilot, like using generation of code, it makes you nervous. But ultimately, my life is much better as a programmer. Purely as a programmer of little things and big things is much better. But there's a nervousness, and I think a lot of people will experience that, and you will experience that by talking to them. And I don't know what we do with that. How we comfort people in the face of this uncertainty.
And you're getting more nervous the more you use it, not less.
Yes, I would have to say yes, because I get better at using it.
Mm-hmm.
So
the learning curve is quite steep.
Yeah. And then there's moments when you're like, oh, it generates a function beautifully. And you sit back, both proud like a parent, but almost like proud like and scared that this thing will be much smarter than me. Like both pride and sadness, almost like a melancholy feeling. But ultimately joy, I think, yeah. What kind of jobs do you think GPT language models would be better than humans at?
Like full, like does the whole thing end to end better, not like what it's doing with you, where it's helping you be maybe 10 times more productive.
Those are both good questions. I would say they're equivalent to me, because if I'm 10 times more productive, wouldn't that mean that there would be a need for much fewer programmers in the world?
I think the world is going to find out that if you can have 10 times as much code at the same price, you can just use even more.
To write even more code.
The world just needs way more code.
It is true that a lot more can be digitized. There could be a lot more code and a lot more stuff.
I think there's like a supply issue.
Yeah. So in terms of really replace jobs, is that a worry for you?
It is. I'm trying to think of like a big category that I believe can be massively impacted. I guess I would say customer service is a category that I could see there are just way fewer jobs relatively soon. I'm not even certain about that, but I could believe it.
So like basic questions about when do I take this pill, if it's a drug company, or when I don't know why I went to that, but like how do I use this product? Like questions,
Yeah.
like how do I use
like whatever
what
call center employees are doing now.
Yeah, this is not work. Yeah, okay.
I want to be clear. I think like these systems will make a lot of jobs just go away. Every technological revolution does. They will enhance many jobs and make them much better, much more fun, much higher paid. And they'll create new jobs that are difficult for us to imagine, even if we're starting to see the first glimpses of them. But I heard someone last week talking about GPT-4 saying that, man, the dignity of work is just such a huge deal. We've really got to worry. Like, even people who think they don't like their jobs, they really need them. It's really important to them and to society. And also, can you believe how awful it is that France is trying to raise the retirement age? And I think we as a society are confused about whether we want to work more or work less. And certainly about whether most people like their jobs and get value out of their jobs or not. Some people do. I love my job. I suspect you do too. That's a real privilege. Not everybody gets to say that. Mm-hmm. If we can move more of the world to better jobs and work to something that can be a broader concept, not something you have to do to be able to eat, but something you do as a creative expression and a way to find fulfillment and happiness, whatever else, even if those jobs look extremely different from the jobs of today, I think that's great. I'm not nervous about it at all.
You have been a proponent of UBI, Universal Basic Income. In the context of AI, can you describe your philosophy there of our human future with UBI? Why you like it? What are some limitations?
I think it is a component of something we should pursue. It is not a full solution. I think people work for lots of reasons besides money. And I think we are going to find incredible new jobs, and society as a whole and people as individuals are going to get much, much richer. But as a cushion through a dramatic transition, and as just like, I think the world should eliminate poverty if able to do so. I think it's a great thing to do as a small part of the bucket of solutions. I helped start a project called WorldCoin, which is a technological solution to this. We also have funded a large, I think maybe the largest and most comprehensive universal basic income study as part of, sponsored by OpenAI. And I think it's like an area we should just be looking into.
What are some like insights from that study that you gained?
We're going to finish up at the end of this year, and we'll be able to talk about it hopefully very early next.
If we can linger on it, how do you think the economic and political systems will change as AI becomes a prevalent part of society? It's such an interesting sort of philosophical question. Looking 10, 20, 50 years from now, what does the economy look like? What does politics look like? Do you see significant transformations in terms of the way democracy functions even?
I love that you asked them together because I think they're super related. I think the economic transformation will drive much of the political transformation here, not the other way around. My working model for the last 5 years has been that the two dominant changes will be that the cost of intelligence and the cost of energy are going over the next couple of decades to dramatically fall from where they are today. And the impact of that, and you're already seeing it with the way you now have like, programming ability beyond what you had as an individual before, is society gets much, much richer, much wealthier in ways that are probably hard to imagine. I think every time that's happened before, it has been that economic impact has had positive political impact as well. And I think it does go the other way too. Like the socio-political values of the Enlightenment enabled the long-running technological revolution and scientific discovery process we've had for the past centuries. But I think we're just going to see more. I'm sure the shape will change, but I think it's this long and beautiful exponential curve.
Do you think there will be more, I don't know what the term is, but systems that resemble something like democratic socialism? I've talked to a few folks on this podcast about these kinds of topics.
Instinct, yes. I hope so.
So that it reallocates some resources in a way that supports, kind of lifts the people who are struggling.
I am a big believer in lift up the floor and don't worry about the ceiling.
If I can test your historical knowledge.
It's probably not going to be good, but let's try it.
Why do you think, I come from the Soviet Union, why do you think communism in the Soviet Union failed?
I recoil at the idea of living in a communist system. And I don't know how much of that is just the biases of the world I grow up in and what I have been taught, and probably more than I realize. But I think like more individualism, more human will, more ability to self-determine is important. And also, I think the ability to try new things and not need permission and not need some sort of central planning, betting on human ingenuity and this sort of like distributed process, I believe is always going to beat centralized planning. And I think that like for all of the deep flaws of America, I think it is the greatest place in the world because it's the best at this.
So it's really interesting that centralized planning failed so in such big ways. But what if, hypothetically, the centralized planning...
It was a perfect super intelligent AGI.
Super intelligent AGI. Again, it might go wrong in the same kind of ways, but it might not. And we don't really know.
We don't really know. It might be better. I expect it would be better. But would it be better than 100 super intelligent or 1,000 super intelligent AGIs sort of in a liberal democratic system?
Arguing.
Yes.
Oh, man.
Now, also, how much of that can happen internally in one super intelligent AGI? Not so obvious.
There is something about, right, but there is something about like tension, like competition.
But you don't know that's not happening inside one model.
Yeah, that's true. It'd be nice if, whether it's engineered in or revealed to be happening, it'd be nice for it to be happening.
And of course, it can happen with multiple AGIs talking to each other or whatever.
There's something also about, Stuart Russell has talked about the control problem of always having AGI to have some degree of uncertainty. not having a dogmatic certainty to it.
That feels important.
So some of that is already handled with human alignment, human feedback, reinforcement learning with human feedback. But it feels like there has to be engineered in like a hard uncertainty, humility. You can put a romantic word to it.
Yeah.
You think that's possible to do?
The definition of those words, I think the details really matter, but as I understand them, yes, I do.
What about the off switch?
That like big red button in the data center we don't tell anybody about. That one.
You don't use that.
I'm a fan. My backpack.
Yeah, in your backpack. You think that's possible to have a switch? You think? I mean, actually, more seriously, more specifically about sort of rolling out of different systems. Do you think it's possible to roll them, unroll them, pull them back in?
Yeah, I mean, we can absolutely take a model back off the internet. We can turn an API off.
Isn't that something you worry about? Like when you release it and millions of people are using it, and like you realize, holy crap, they're using it for, I don't know, worrying about the like all kinds of terrible use cases.
We do worry about that a lot. I mean, we try to figure out with as much red teaming and testing ahead of time as we do how to avoid a lot of those. But I can't emphasize enough how much the collective intelligence and creativity of the world will beat OpenAI and all of the red teamers we can hire. So we put it out, but we put it out in a way we can make changes.
In the millions of people that have used ChatGPT and GPT, what have you learned about human civilization in general? I mean, the question I ask is, are we mostly good, or is there a lot of malevolence in the human spirit?
Well, to be clear, I don't, nor does anyone else at OpenAI, that they're like reading all the ChatGPT messages.
Yeah.
But from what I hear people using it for, at least the people I talk to, and from what I see on Twitter, we are definitely mostly good. But A, not all of us are all of the time. And B, we really want to push on the edges of these systems. And, you know, we really want to test out some darker theories of the world.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's very interesting. And I think that actually doesn't communicate the fact that we're like fundamentally dark inside, but we like to go to the dark places in order to maybe rediscover the light. It feels like dark humor is a part of that. Some of the toughest things you go through if you suffer in life in a war zone, the people I've interacted with that are in the midst of a war, they're usually
still make
joking
jokes.
around. They're joking around, and they're dark jokes.
Yep.
So
there's something there. I totally agree
about that tension. So just to the model, how do you decide what isn't misinformation? How do you decide what is true? You actually have OpenAI's internal factual performance benchmark. There's a lot of cool benchmarks here. How do you build a benchmark for what is true? What is truth, Sam Altman?
Like math is true, and the origin of COVID is not agreed upon as ground truth.
Those are the two things.
And then there's stuff that's like certainly not true. But between that first and second milestone, there's a lot of disagreement.
What do you look for? Where can not even just now, but in the future, where can we as a human civilization look to for truth?
What do you know is true? What are you absolutely certain is true?
I have generally epistemic humility about everything, and I'm freaked out by how little I know and understand about the world. So that even that question is terrifying to me. There's a bucket of things that have a high degree of truthiness, which is where you would put math, a lot of math.
Yeah, can't be certain, but it's good enough for like this conversation. We can say math is true.
Yeah, I mean, quite a bit of physics. There's historical facts, maybe dates of when a war started. There's a lot of details about military conflict inside history. Of course, you start to get, just read Blitzed, which is this.
Oh, I want to read that.
Yeah.
How was it?
It was really good. It gives a theory of Nazi Germany and Hitler that so much can be described about Hitler and a lot of the upper echelon of Nazi Germany through the excessive use of drugs. And
just amphetamines, right?
And amphetamines, but also other stuff. But it's just a lot. And, that's really interesting. It's really compelling. And for some reason, like, whoa, that would explain a lot. That's somehow really sticky. It's an idea that's sticky. And then you read a lot of criticism of that book later by historians that's actually, there's a lot of cherry picking going on. And it's actually is using the fact that that's a very sticky explanation. There's something about humans that likes a very simple narrative to describe everything.
For sure.
And then,
too much amphetamines caused the war is like a great, even if not true, simple explanation that feels satisfying and excuses a lot of other probably much darker human truths.
Yeah, the military strategy employed, the atrocities, the speeches, the just the way Hitler was as a human being, the way Hitler was as a leader, all of that could be explained through this one little lens. And it's like, well, that's, if you say that's true, that's a really compelling truth. So maybe truth is, in one sense, is defined as a thing that is a collective intelligence we kind of all, our brains are sticking to, and we're like, yeah. A bunch of ants get together and like, yeah, this is it. I was going to say sheep, but there's a connotation to that. But yeah, it's hard to know what is true. And I think when constructing a GPT like model, you have to contend with that.
I think a lot of the answers, you know, like if you ask GPT-4, I don't know, just to stick on the same topic, did COVID leak from a lab?
Yeah.
I expect you would get a reasonable answer.
It was a really good answer. Yeah. It laid out the hypotheses. The interesting thing it said, which is refreshing to hear, is there's something like there's very little evidence for either hypothesis, direct evidence, which is important to state. A lot of people kind of, the reason why there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of debate is because there's not strong physical evidence of either.
Heavy circumstantial evidence on either side.
And then the other is more like biological, theoretical kind of discussion. And I think the nuanced answer that GPT provided was actually pretty damn good. And also, importantly, saying that there is uncertainty. Just the fact that there is uncertainty as a statement was really powerful.
Man, remember when like the social media platforms were banning people for saying it was a lab leak?
Yeah, that's really humbling. The overreach of power in censorship. But the more powerful GPT becomes, the more pressure there'll be to censor.
We have a different set of challenges faced by the previous generation of companies, which is people talk about free speech issues with GPT, but it's not quite the same thing. It's not like this is a computer program and it's allowed to say, and it's also not about the mass spread and the challenges that I think may have made that Twitter and Facebook and others have struggled with so much. So we will have very significant challenges, but they'll be very new and very different.
And maybe, yeah, very new, very different is a good way to put it. There could be truths that are harmful in their truth. I don't know. Group differences in IQ. There you go. Scientific work that, when spoken, might do more harm. And you ask GPT that, should GPT tell you? There's books written on this that are rigorous scientifically, but are very uncomfortable and probably not productive in any sense, but maybe are. There's people arguing all kinds of sides of this, and a lot of them have hate in their heart. So what do you do with that? If there's a large number of people who hate others, but are actually citing scientific studies, what do you do with that? What does GPT do with that? What is the priority of GPT to decrease the amount of hate in the world? Is it up to GPT or is it up to us humans?
I think we as OpenAI have responsibility for the tools we put out into the world. I think the tools themselves can't have responsibility in the way I understand it.
Wow. So you carry some of that burden,
For sure.
responsibility.
All of us at the company.
So there could be harm caused by this tool. And
there will be harm caused by this tool. There will be harm. There will be tremendous benefits, but you know, tools do wonderful good and real bad, and we will minimize the bad and maximize the good.
And you have to carry the weight of that. How do you avoid GPT-4 from being hacked or jailbroken? There's a lot of interesting ways that people have done that, like with token smuggling, or other methods like Dan.
You know, when I was like a kid, basically, I worked once on jailbreaking an iPhone, the first iPhone, I think. And I thought it was so cool. And I will say it's very strange to be on the other side of that.
You're now the man.
Kind of sucks.
Is some of it fun? How much of it is a security threat? I mean, how much do you have to take it seriously? How is it even possible to solve this problem? Where does it rank on the set of problems? I'll just keep asking questions, prompting.
We want users to have a lot of control and get the model to behave in the way they want within some very broad bounds. And I think the whole reason for jailbreaking is right now we haven't yet figured out how to like give that to people. And the more we solve that problem, I think the less need there'll be for jailbreaking.
Yeah, it's kind of like piracy gave birth to Spotify.
People don't really jailbreak iPhones that much anymore. Yeah. And it's gotten harder for sure, but also like you can just do a lot of stuff now.
Just like with jailbreaking, I mean, there's a lot of hilarity that ensued. So Evan Morikawa, cool guy, he's at OpenAI. Yeah. He tweeted something that he also was really kind to send me, to communicate with me, send me a long email describing the history of OpenAI, all the different developments. He really lays it out. I mean, that's a much longer conversation of all the awesome stuff that happened. It's just amazing. But his tweet was DALL-E July 22, ChatGPT November 22, API 66% cheaper, August 22, embeddings 500 times cheaper while state of the art, December 22, ChatGPT API also 10 times cheaper while state of the art, March 23, Whisper API March 23, GPT-4 today, whenever that was, last week. And the conclusion is this team ships.
We do.
What's the process of going? And then we can extend that back. I mean, listen, from the 2015 OpenAI launch, GPT, GPT-2, GPT-3, OpenAI 5 finals with the gaming stuff, which was incredible. GPT-3 API released, DALL-E, Instruct GPT tech. I could fine tuning. There's just a million things available. DALL-E, DALL-E 2 preview, and then DALL-E is available to 1 million people. Whisper, second model release, just across all of the stuff, both research and deployment of actual products that could be in the hands of people. What is the process of going from idea to deployment that allows you to be so successful at shipping AI-based products?
I mean, there's a question of should we be really proud of that, or should other companies be really embarrassed?
Yeah.
And we believe in a very high bar for the people on the team. We work hard, which, you're not even like supposed to say anymore or something. We give a huge amount of trust and autonomy and authority to individual people. And we try to hold each other to very high standards. And, there's a process which we can talk about, but it won't be that illuminating. I think it's those other things that make us able to ship at a high velocity.
So GPT-4 is a pretty complex system. Like you said, there's like a million little hacks you can do to keep improving it. There's the cleaning up the data set, all that. All those are like separate teams. So do you give autonomy? Is there just autonomy to these fascinating different problems?
If like most people in the company weren't really excited to work super hard and collaborate well on GPT-4 and thought other stuff was more important, there'd be very little I or anybody else could do to make it happen. But we spend a lot of time figuring out what to do, getting on the same page about why we're doing something, and then how to divide it up and all coordinate together.
So then you have like a passion for the goal here. So everybody's really passionate across the different teams.
Yeah, we care.
How do you hire? How do you hire great teams? The folks I've interacted with OpenAI, some of the most amazing folks I've ever met.
It takes a lot of time. Like I spend, I think a lot of people claim to spend a third of their time hiring. I for real truly do. I still approve every single hire at OpenAI. And I think there's, we're working on a problem that is like very cool and that great people want to work on. We have great people and some people want to be around them. But even with that, I think there's just no shortcut for putting a ton of effort into this.
So even when you have the good people, hard work.
I think so.
Microsoft announced a new multi-year, multi-billion-dollar, reported to be $10 billion investment into OpenAI. Can you describe the thinking that went into this? What are the pros? What are the cons of working with a company like Microsoft?
It's not all perfect or easy, but on the whole, they have been an amazing partner to us. Satya and Kevin and Mikhail are super aligned with us, super flexible, have gone like way above and beyond the call of duty to do things that we have needed to get all this to work. This is like a big, iron, complicated engineering project, and they are a big and complex company. And I think like many great partnerships or relationships, we've sort of just continued to ramp up our investment in each other, and it's been very good.
It's a for-profit company. It's very driven. It's very large scale. Is there pressure to kind of make a lot of money?
I think most other companies wouldn't. Maybe now they would. It wouldn't at the time have understood why we needed all the weird control provisions we have and why we need all the kind of like AGI specialness. Mm-hmm. And I know that because I talked to some other companies before we did the first deal with Microsoft. And I think they are unique in terms of the companies at that scale that understood why we needed the control provisions we have.
And so those control provisions help make sure that the capitalist imperative does not affect the development of AI. Well, let me just ask you as an aside about Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft. He seems to have successfully transformed Microsoft into this fresh, innovative, developer-friendly company.
I agree.
It's really hard to do for a very large company. What have you learned from him? Why do you think he was able to do this kind of thing? What insights do you have about why this one human being is able to contribute to the pivot of a large company into something very new?
I think most CEOs are either great leaders or great managers. And from what I have observed with Satya, he is both. Super visionary, really like gets people excited, really makes long duration and correct calls. And also, he is just a super effective hands-on executive and I assume manager too. And I think that's pretty rare.
I mean, Microsoft, I'm guessing, like IBM, or like a lot of companies have been at it for a while, probably have like old school kind of momentum. So you like inject AI into it, it's very tough. Or anything, even like open source, the culture of open source. Like how how hard is it to walk into a room and be like, the way we've been doing things are totally wrong? Like I'm sure there's a lot of firing involved, or a little like twisting of arms or something. So do you have to rule by fear, by love? Like what can you say to the leadership aspect of this?
I mean, he's just like done an unbelievable job, but he is amazing at being like clear and firm and getting people to want to come along, but also like compassionate and patient with his people too.
I'm getting a lot of love, not fear.
I'm a big Satya fan.
So am I from a distance. I mean, you have so much in your life trajectory that I can ask you about. We can probably talk for many more hours, but I got to ask you because of Y Combinator, because of startups and so on. The recent, and you've tweeted about this, about the Silicon Valley Bank, SVB. What's your best understanding of what happened? What is interesting? What is interesting to understand about what happened in SVB?
I think they just like horribly mismanaged buying while chasing returns in a very silly world of 0% interest rates. Buying very long dated instruments secured by very short term and variable deposits. And this was obviously dumb. I think totally the fault of the management team, although I'm not sure what the regulators were thinking either. And is an example of where I think you see the dangers of incentive misalignment. Because as the Fed kept raising, I assume that the incentives on people working at SVB to not sell at a loss their, super safe bonds, which were now down 20% or whatever, or, down less than that, but then kept going down. That's like a classic example of incentive misalignment. Now, I suspect they're not the only bank in a bad position here. The response of the federal government, I think, took much longer than it should have, but by Sunday afternoon, I was glad they had done what they've done. We'll see what happens next.
So how do you avoid depositors from doubting their bank?
What I think would be good to do right now is just and this requires statutory change, but it may be a full guarantee of deposits, maybe a much, much higher than 250K. But you really don't want depositors having to doubt the security of their deposits. And this thing that a lot of people on Twitter were saying is like, well, it's their fault. They should have been like, reading the balance sheet and the risk audit of the bank. Like, do we really want people to have to do that? I would argue no.
What impact has it had on startups that you see?
Well, there was a weekend of terror for sure. And now I think, even though it was only 10 days ago, it feels like forever and people have forgotten about it.
But it kind of reveals the fragility of our economic system.
We may not be done. That may have been like the gun showing falling off the nightstand in the first scene of the movie or whatever.
There could be like other banks.
For sure there could be.
Well, even with FTX, I mean, I'm just, that's fraud, but there's mismanagement. And you wonder how stable our economic system is, especially with new entrants with AGI.
I think one of the many lessons to take away from this SVB thing is how fast and how much the world changes and how little I think our experts, leaders, business leaders, regulators, whatever, understand it. So the speed with which the SVB bank run happened because of Twitter, because of mobile banking apps, whatever, was so different than the 2008 collapse where we didn't have those things really. And I don't think that kind of the people in power realize how much the field had shifted. And I think that is a very tiny preview of the shifts that AGI will bring.
What gives you hope in that shift from an economic perspective? Because it sounds scary, the instability.
I am nervous about the speed with this changes and the speed with which our institutions can adapt, which is part of why we want to start deploying these systems really early, why they're really weak, so that people have as much time as possible to do this. I think it's really scary to like have nothing, and then drop a super powerful AGI all at once on the world. I don't think people should want that to happen. But what gives me hope is like, I think the less zeros, the more positive sum the world gets, the better. And the upside of the vision here, just how much better life can be, I think that's going to like unite a lot of us. And even if it doesn't, it's just going to make it all feel more positive sum.
When you create an AGI system, you'll be one of the few people in the room that get to interact with it first, assuming GPT-4 is not that. What question would you ask her, him, it? What discussion would you have?
You know, one of the things that I have realized, like this is a little aside and not that important, but I have never felt any pronoun other than it towards any of our systems. But most other people say him or her or something like that. And I wonder why I am so different. Like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's I watch it develop. Maybe it's I think more about it. But I'm curious where that difference comes from.
I think probably you could, because you watch it develop. But then again, I watch a lot of stuff develop, and I always go to him or her. I anthropomorphize aggressively, and certainly most humans do.
I think it's really important that we try to explain, to educate people that this is a tool and not a creature.
Yes, but I also think there will be a room in society for creatures, and we should draw hard lines between those.
If something's a creature, I'm happy for people to like think of it and talk about it as a creature, but I think it is dangerous to project creatureness onto a tool.
That's one perspective. A perspective I would take, if it's done transparently, is projecting creatureness onto a tool makes that tool more usable if it's done well.
Yeah, so if there's like kind of UI affordances that work, I understand that. I still think we want to be like pretty careful with it.
Because the more creature-like it is, the more it can manipulate you emotionally.
Or just the more you think that it's doing something or should be able to do something or rely on it for something that it's not capable of.
What if it is capable? What about Sam Altman? What if it's capable of love? Do you think there will be romantic relationships like in the movie Her with GPT?
There are companies now that offer, like for lack of a better word, like romantic companionship AIs.
Replica is an example of such a company.
Yeah. I personally don't feel any interest in that.
So you're focusing on creating intelligent
But I understand
tools.
why other people do.
That's interesting. For some reason, I'm very drawn to that.
Have you spent a lot of time interacting with Replica or anything similar?
Replica, but also just building stuff myself. Like I have robot dogs now that I use. I use the movement of the robots to communicate emotion. I've been exploring how to do that.
Look, there are going to be very interactive GPT-4 powered pets or whatever, robots, companions, and a lot of people seem really excited about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting possibilities. I think you'll discover them, I think, as you go along. That's the whole point. Like the things you say in this conversation, you might in a year say, this was right.
No,
I
may turn out that I like love my GPT-4
maybe you
dog
want your
robot or whatever.
Maybe you want your programming assistant to be a little kinder and not mock you with your incompetence.
No, I think you do want the style of the way GPT-4 talks to you.
Yes.
Really matters. You probably want something different than what I want, but we both probably want something different than the current GPT-4. And that will be really important, even for a very tool-like thing.
Is there styles of conversation? Oh, no, contents of conversations you're looking forward to with an AGI, like GPT 5, 6, 7? Is there stuff where, like, where do you go to outside of the fun meme stuff for actual? Like,
I mean, what I'm excited for is like, please explain to me how all of physics works and solve all remaining mysteries.
So, like a theory of everything.
I'll be real happy.
Faster than light travel.
Don't you want to know?
So there's several things to know. It's like NP hard. Is it possible and how to do it? Yeah, I want to know. Probably the first question would be, are there other intelligent alien civilizations out there? But I don't think AGI has the ability to do that, to know that.
Might be able to help us figure out how to go detect. They may need to like send some emails to humans and say, can you run these experiments? Can you build this space probe? Can you wait, a very long time?
Or provide a much better estimate than that Drake equation.
Yeah.
With the knowledge we already have, and maybe process all because we've been collecting a lot of
maybe it's in the data. Maybe we need to build better detectors, which a really advanced AI could tell us how to do. It may not be able to answer it on its own, but it may be able to tell us what to go build to collect more data.
What if it says the aliens are already here?
I think I would just go about my life.
Yeah. Because
I mean, a version of that is like, what are you doing differently now that like, if GPT-4 told you and you believed it, okay, AGI is here, or AGI is coming real soon, what are you going to do differently?
the source of joy and happiness and fulfillment in life is from other humans. So it's mostly nothing,
Right.
unless it causes some kind of threat. But that threat would have to be like literally a fire.
Like, are we living now with a greater degree of digital intelligence than you would have expected 3 years ago
Yeah,
in the
much,
world?
much more. Yeah.
And if you could go back and be told by an oracle 3 years ago, which is, you know, blink of an eye, that in March of 2023 you will be living with this degree of digital intelligence, would you expect your life to be more different than it is right now?
Probably, but there's also a lot of different trajectories intermixed. I would have expected the society's response to a pandemic to be much better, much clearer, less divided. I was very confused about there's a lot of stuff given the amazing technological advancements that
Yeah.
are happening, the weird social divisions. It's almost like the more technological advancement there is, the more we're going to be having fun with social division. Or maybe the technological advancement just revealed the division that was already there. But all of that just like confuses my understanding of how far along we are as a human civilization and what brings us meaning and how we discover truth together and knowledge and wisdom. So I don't know. But when I open Wikipedia, I'm happy that humans were able to create this thing.
For sure.
Yes, there is bias. Yes, but it's incredible.
It's a triumph.
It's a triumph of human civilization.
100%.
Google search, the search period is incredible. The way it was able to do, 20 years ago, and now this is this new thing, GPT, is like, is this like going to be the next, like the conglomeration of all of that made web search and Wikipedia so magical, but now more directly accessible. You can have a conversation with the damn thing. It's incredible. Let me ask you for advice for young people in high school and college, what to do with their life, how to have a career they can be proud of, how to have a life they can be proud of. You wrote a blog post a few years ago titled "How to Be Successful," and there's a bunch of really people should check out that blog post. It's so succinct, it's so brilliant. You have a bunch of bullet points. Compound yourself. Have almost too much self-belief, learn to think independently, get good at sales in quotes, make it easy to take risks, focus, work hard, as we talked about, be bold, be willful, be hard to compete with, build a network. You get rich by owning things, be internally driven. What stands out to you from that or beyond as advice you can give?
Yeah, no, I think it is like good advice in some sense, but I also think it's way too tempting to take advice from other people. And the stuff that worked for me, which I tried to write down there, probably doesn't work that well or may not work as well for other people. Or like other people may find out that they want to just have a super different life trajectory. And I think I mostly got what I wanted by ignoring advice. And I think like I tell people not to listen to too much advice. Listening to advice from other people should be approached with great caution.
How would you describe how you've approached life outside of this advice that you would advise to other people? So really just in the quiet of your mind to think, what gives me happiness? What is the right thing to do here? How can I have the most impact?
I wish it were that, introspective all the time. It's a lot of just like, what will bring me joy? What will bring me fulfillment? What will be, I do think a lot about what I can do that will be useful, but like, who do I want to spend my time with? What do I want to spend my time doing?
Like a fish in water, just going along with the current.
Yeah, that's certainly what it feels like. I mean, I think that's what most people would say if they were really honest about it.
Yeah, if they really think, yeah. And some of that then gets to the Sam Harris discussion of free will being an illusion,
Of course.
which it very well might be, which is a really complicated thing to wrap your head around. What do you think is the meaning of this whole thing? That's a question you could ask in AGI. What's the meaning of life? As far as you look at it, you're part of a small group of people that are creating something truly special, something that almost feels like humanity was always moving towards.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is I don't think it's a small group of people. I think this is like the product of the culmination of whatever you want to call it, an amazing amount of human effort. And if you think about everything that had to come together for this to happen, when those people discovered the transistor in the 40s, like, is this what they were planning on? All of the work, the hundreds of thousands, millions of people, whatever it's been, that it took to go from that one first transistor to packing the numbers we do into a chip and figuring out how to wire them all up together and everything else that goes into this. the energy required, the science, like just every step. Like this is the output of like all of us, and I think that's pretty cool.
And before the transistor, there was 100 billion people who lived and died, had sex, fell in love, ate a lot of good food, murdered each other sometimes, rarely, but mostly just good to each other, struggled to survive. And before that, there was bacteria and eukaryotes and all of that.
And all of that was on this one exponential curve.
Yeah. How many others are there? I wonder. We will ask. That is the question number one for me for AGI. How many others? And I'm not sure which answer I want to hear. Sam, you're an incredible person. It's an honor to talk to you. Thank you for the work you're doing. Like I said, I've talked to Ilias Esquerra, I've talked to Greg, I've talked to so many people at OpenAI. They're really good people. They're doing really interesting work.
We are going to try our hardest to get to a good place here. I think the challenges are tough. I understand that not everyone agrees with our approach of iterative deployment and also iterative discovery, but it's what we believe in. I think we're making good progress, and I think the pace is fast, but so is the progress. So like the pace of capabilities and change is fast, but I think that also means we will have new tools to figure out alignment and sort of the capital S safety problem.
I feel like we're in this together. I can't wait what we together as a human civilization come up with.
It's going to be great, I think, and we'll work really hard to make
Me
sure.
too. Thanks for listening to this conversation with Sam Altman. To support this podcast, please check out our sponsors in the description. And now, let me leave you with some words from Alan Turing in 1951. It seems probable that once the machine thinking method has started, it would not take long to outstrip our feeble powers. At some stage, therefore, we should have to expect the machines to take control. Thank you for listening, and hope to see you next time.
You're listening to TIP.
Hey everyone, welcome to this Wednesday's release of the Bitcoin Fundamentals Podcast. On today's show, I have Bitcoin Layer 2 Lightning expert Jesse Schrader on the show to talk about all the fascinating stuff they have going on with their Amboss website. Amboss is a website that analyzes all the Bitcoin full nodes and immediately settling channels that are open between the nodes on the network. Jesse has some exciting metrics and an announcement relating to his company providing an open market for liquidity providers that can now receive income for providing such liquidity services. This is a really fascinating chat that really makes a person think about the implications for risk-free rates and finance at large. So with that said, here's my chat with Mr. Jesse Schrader.
You're listening to Bitcoin Fundamentals by the Investors Podcast Network. Now for your host, Preston Pish.
Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. I'm here with Jesse Schrader, and Jesse, super pumped to have this conversation. We've bumped into each other here and there at various conferences. I've been a user of Amboss for a few years now and love the site. And it's fitting that we finally have this conversation to talk about what you're working on. So welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Preston. And super happy to be here and share what we've been working on. Your podcast is legendary. And also the reason of so much traffic to Amboss was, because you spun up a node way back in the day.
Man, I was just
dream to be able to talk to you.
I was just learning, and you guys had such a sleek interface, like the other things that are out there to like connect with other nodes. I mean, it felt a little bit like I was programming in terminal, which I clearly can't do. I'm pretty clueless. I run a, I run an Umbrel. So I need the turnkey node solution. And you guys had like this just amazing site to connect nodes. So bravo to you guys. Here's where Jesse, this is where I want to start. Take us back to Lightning when it was just being stood up. Like you came into Bitcoin, what was it, 2016 timeframe, somewhere in that range?
Yeah, I got into Bitcoin in 2017, really.
2017.
And,
okay.
Yeah, got pretty excited about the number going up. And then, of course, the number started going down. And that's when I really dove in to figure out what it is that I actually bought. And, part of my excitement was buying gifts and like with Bitcoin. And I paid just crazy high fees. After experiencing that really pushed me into, okay, how do I pay less in fees? Because really I was paying like $60 for a single transaction. And that was just a crazy time for Bitcoin transactions. And that pushed me into Lightning.
Before you were a Bitcoiner, you have this interesting background in legal services, and specifically with class action lawsuits for overdraft fees, predatory loans, identity theft. What did that experience kind of prepare you for, and how has some of that experience kind of leaked over into what you're doing right now with designing this whole new financial system, global financial system?
From the legal services background, most of that was in class action lawsuits. Really, I was there as a temp worker, answering phones, reading from a script, and just reading to the people who called. What was the class action lawsuit that the callers were involved in? And, the first case they put me on was about overdraft fees, where banks and like one particular bank, but really all the banks did this. They would reorganize debit card transactions in highest to lowest dollar order. And the consequence of that was that the bank could charge more overdraft fees to a customer because they had more overdraft fees when their bank account balance was zero, if they switched around the order of it. Like there were tons of cases that went through that building. There's a whole section dedicated to Wells Fargo, as well as, other identity, like security breaches. The Target issue happened through there, where every Target customer that had a debit card transaction between several years, their information was leaked. So that was kind of laying the groundwork of letting me know that there's some real problems with our payments infrastructure. Even if you're talking about just debit cards before you get into credit. Of course, like in the building, there was also like mortgage lending, discrimination, etc. But really, it was a huge learning moment for me about payments.
Back to your start in Bitcoin, you met Tony Potdevin is the name, and he was working for ThunderHub. And people just have to realize, like back at this time, 2017, when you two met, and Lightning in general, like this was more of a, like people didn't even know if like this was going to work. Like anybody who was dealing in Lightning back in 2017, they weren't dealing with anything like what we've got right now, which are these turnkey solutions with running a node on Umbrel or whatever one that you're using. I know for me personally, back in 2017, it was just like a talking point. Like, yeah, you know, in maybe a few years, this will be something that people are actually using or doing. But for now, like you got layer one, and maybe there's a scaling solution. So tell it to us from your point of view when you met Tony, and like what it was that you guys thought you were going to do with Amboss.
Yeah, so early days of Lightning was just a couple of Telegram groups where some folks that were wanting to experience Lightning were getting together and say, I'll open a channel to you. Maybe you can open a channel to me. And like, this was like the reckless days. That hashtag reckless was all over the place because Lightning was very experimental at that stage. Now, as we're experimenting with these things and L&D is improving, which is like one of the main implementations of Lightning, as that was improving, it became more and more comfortable. So then there was a size limit for Lightning channels that was part of like the initial setup, just to like protect users from funds. But really, I got connected with some of the early tool builders, and one of those was Tony Potdevin, and he was building ThunderHub, which he had built in a hackathon. And when he built that was like an actual user interface that I could understand. You know, I'm not a wizard when it comes to working in command line, and you know, I know a couple of commands, just enough to be dangerous. But putting together a user interface for Lightning was so important. I got connected with Tony, sent him a few suggestions, and he saw me helping early Lightning users out in the chat, just, you know, how to get ThunderHub set up, how to navigate the interface, like what opening a channel was, what's sending a payment, what's receiving a payment, these types of basic pieces, as well as like setting up channel backups. So those early tools, like us getting together was pretty important. You know, me on the more social side, and then Tony, who's like just a ruthless tool builder that iterates really quickly.
It's crazy to me to think that, you know, like I use ThunderHub whenever every channel I've ever opened, I've opened it through ThunderHub. And for me as a non-programmer, like it was an intimidating interface. But when I take a step back and I think about, well, what would it be if I didn't have that interface to use to even open channels? And I don't even know how that would be possible without an interface like ThunderHub. So he's the guy that literally designed ThunderHub and made it possible so that I can go to another node. Just for people that haven't run their own full node, let me just describe it to you real easily. So I run a full node. I go and I can go to Amboss, a website that literally indexes all the people that are running full nodes. And I can find basically their IP address, or it'd be like your mailing address if you were going to mail a letter to somebody. I can find this mailing address for other nodes that I want to connect to. And whenever I connect to them, I'm opening a channel with Satoshis, Bitcoin, then can be routed back and forth to each other. And there's a whole bunch of people that are doing this between the nodes. And the only way you can find other people is you got to have some type of global index that people can reference. And that's what Amboss is. And then ThunderHub is where you would go to actually open these channels and say, this is the address, this is how much I want to open, and do it in the next block. This is the fee that I'm willing to pay, and whatnot. So that's what we're talking about if people are wondering that maybe aren't as intimately familiar with Layer 2. But okay, so you met him in 2019. And so how did you guys How did you come up with the idea for Amboss? Like, what was it that was driving you to know that there was something here to build?
For early days, there's a big question of like, who do I connect to? What are smart decisions in this new economy that we're creating? I mean, the whole like Lightning Network in general. I mean, you're taking your savings and you're deciding, I'm going to put it in a new format that creates a pathway to another node. And in so doing, that creates a payment network that operates without credit and without debt. You have to make decisions that are costly. I'm going to make a Bitcoin transaction that's going to create a new pathway. In order to make that decision, especially if the decision is costly, I'm going to need some information. And so that was the main driver behind Amboss. Like, how do I package all the data together about this network and kind of create a map of it and be able to guide people on how to make a better payment network without credit, without debt, that works really fast, where you could pay next to zero fees. We started indexing the Lightning Network, and there were a couple of tools out there that did something similar. You know, one was like 1ML, and then Fiat Jaff behind Noster, he actually created one of these explorers as well. But the early product was a Lightning Network Explorer, which basically just means all the nodes on the network, we're going to give you a profile page. You can have your name, the color of your node on there. You can have all your different channels listed, and we'll just make a whole bunch of data visualizations to help you understand the data about your node. So that was the main driver. And then figuring out like, oh, okay, we need to start organizing node operators using markets.
I would think that this would just be so overwhelming at the beginning. Was there a point early on where you guys were like, okay, like what in the world are we doing here? Or did it just kind of immediately start clicking and like all the data out there, like you were just a pig in mud? Like walk us through those early days of what this was like.
Figuring out like, okay, how much did I just pay to open a channel? Like, where did the money go? And we know like it's reckless at this point. Like we're always double checking the node. Like, how do we know that the money is still there?
Yeah.
Because I'm watching my balance and it's changing around. Why is it changing? And like, there's no one that is able to really answer that question for you, because there's like developers that are working on the protocol. Like, how are we supposed to like make safe guardrails for people to help understand like what just happened with their money?
I'm laughing, Jesse, because this is the exact feeling I had when I opened my first channel and I had all these tools at my disposal. And this is how I felt. So I couldn't imagine how everyone felt in the early days without having some type of graphical way to view that the channel's been opened with this other party, right? Like I could literally see it on your on Amboss and with Thunderhub, and I could see that these things were happening, which you would think would put a person at ease. But the way you were just describing it is, I was just like, did I do it right? Did I just literally like shoot 10 million sats into the ether and they're gone forever? Like I just didn't have any type of, and there's nobody sitting next to me like while I'm doing this. And it was a little intimidating, but keep going. I want to hear more. Keep going.
Like what Bitcoin does really well is accounting. Like you're just keeping track of things. And, you know, my background is environmental engineering. So like there's going to be flows from one point to another point.
Mm-hmm.
And it all, at the end of the day, it has to all add up. Like these are the calculations that I'm doing. And in order to like return a profit, you have to have an idea of what kind of funds are you spending. And so I'm having to do that calculation and like checking against my node, making sure that everything lines up, just to give myself comfort. And now with Amboss, like we're just trying to streamline all of that activity to help people, you know, make better decisions when it comes to using the Lightning Network, so that we can actually create an alternative to traditional payment networks.
Is there any other evolution that you guys have noticed? So you start with basically this data analytics, basically coming up with a footprint of the entire layer 2 Bitcoin network. As you're trying to operationalize Amboss, like, was there were there any evolutions that happened, or like moments where you're like, hey, maybe we should also be doing these other things? Or have you guys just continued to try to make the original idea just better and better each day?
One piece that we noticed is that people were coming into the Lightning Network and it was happening faster and faster. So when people joined, they would usually come into the groups and ask, why can't I receive a payment? I want to send Lightning to my node. And we would just have to tell them, you can't do that because you need someone else to open a channel to you. How are the sats going to reach your point B if there's no road that's going there? So really, liquidity in Lightning is directional. Because there's no credit and no debt, someone has to allocate their savings to you so that you can receive a payment. And we realized that this is a huge user experience problem. That huge problem of acquiring inbound liquidity means that there's a market there. And so what we put together was what we called Magma, where we just created a marketplace where you can log on and look at the different nodes that are willing to open channels to you. And they all have prices there. So you could just, with a simple Lightning payment, be able to buy a channel to your node. Mm-hmm. And your Lightning payment only goes through if they actually open a channel to you. So that's how we set up this marketplace, because in the early days, I was actually trying to sell channels, say okay, you need liquidity. Well, it costs me money. So how much are you going to pay me to open a high quality channel to your node so that you can receive payments? So this is something that I was doing via Telegram, just a simple messaging app. But with Amboss, we're hey, we put a company together. Let's create a marketplace for this that actually matches up people that have been saving Bitcoin with the people that need to receive payments. Because we know this is going to be huge in the future when we've got people selling goods on Lightning and they want to be able to receive payments and receive those reliably.
For people that are listening to the conversation, most are not running their own node. Most are not tech savvy or really kind of doing the things that the hardcore Bitcoiners are technically doing with their coins and testing and trying these things out. So this is a question that I was going to ask you much further along in the show, but I think it's pertinent to do it right now, just because people that are listening have heard us talk about, you need an inbound liquidity. You need this technical thing to happen in order for all this to really kind of work. And they're probably thinking to themselves, there's just no way that this is going to catch on. But for folks that don't have a layer 2 wallet, you can go and download Wallet of Satoshi. You can go on the Cash App and you can seamlessly use layer 1, layer 2 Bitcoins. You don't even realize which one you're using. It's already seamless to the end user. The UX is completely seamless. For that person, help them kind of understand, I guess, how you see this evolving 5 to 10 years from now. What is the typical user of Bitcoin? Are they don't have to know any of this stuff? Is that a problem that they don't have to understand all this as far as the centralizing forces? Or do you think that the fact that they have the optionality to do these things if they really want to is enough to make sure that Bitcoin doesn't have any type of attack vector? I think is where I'm really going with the question.
When the end user uses Lightning, generally right now, they're using custodial wallets. That means that your Bitcoin that you claim is yours is actually being held by someone else. Now, thankfully, we're in early days of Bitcoin where a lot of these developers and wallet creators are our friends. There's not a lot of enemies to Bitcoin and to Lightning right now, but that may not always be the case. Now, to actually take another step and say, I'm not going to trust another company or person, I'm going to have to set up my own infrastructure. And that infrastructure is essentially a small server. Now, we've kind of operationalized this a lot. Umbrel and Voltage have done, phenomenal jobs at like making running your own server a much easier process. But that is a way to do it and minimize the amount of trust that is going on in payments. What this actually does, in effect, is like almost sets up a city on a map, and there's going to be highways going between all of these different cities on the map.
Let's take a quick break and hear from today's sponsors.
River has become a Bitcoin exchange of choice for the long-term investor. At river.com, you can purchase Bitcoin with no fees when you dollar cost average, as well as set up your beneficiaries to inherit your assets. It's the set it and forget it solution for investing in Bitcoin. I preach Bitcoin self-custody, and actually, so does River. But you can have peace of mind knowing River holds Bitcoin in multi-sig cold storage with 100% full reserves, letting you withdraw at any time since they don't use or lend client assets. And what truly sets River apart is they've built their own infrastructure so they don't rely on third-party custodians. As you know, that is rule number one in Bitcoin. River has a client service team that's US-based and available by phone. Develop your own personal point of contact with River Private Client and let them be your gateway to Bitcoin for your personal or business account. River also offers hosted mining services. They enable you to make Lightning payments, and developers can use River Lightning services to connect their business to the Lightning Network. It's the full suite of Bitcoin products in one simple package. There's a new standard in Bitcoin, and River is setting it. See why at river.com or on the River iOS app.
Support for this podcast comes from Wise, the account that lets you send, spend, and receive money internationally. 50 currencies, 170 countries, all with one account designed to take on the world. So whether you're taking on Rio or Rome, Miami or Mumbai, you'll always get the mid-market exchange rate when you convert currencies with no markups and no hidden fees. Wise helps you save money no matter where you're going next. And Wise Business has everything you need to run and grow your global business. So you can send money, receive payments, and manage cash flow wherever it flows. No extra legwork, no hassle. Companies like Xero and Google Pay are already managing their money the Wise way. Join 15 million people and businesses who are going global with Wise. Learn how the Wise account could work for you by downloading the app or visiting wise.com/TIP. Just download the app or visit wise.com/TIP to get started today. If you own a small business, you know the value of time. GetRefunds.com does too. That's why they've made it easy, no matter how busy you are, to apply for the Employee Retention Credit, or ERC. Go to GetRefunds.com to get started, and in less than 8 minutes, see if your business qualifies for ERC assistance. Your business may be eligible for a payroll tax refund of up to $26,000 per employee kept on payroll during COVID-19. GetRefunds.com has already helped clients claim over $3 billion in payroll tax refunds through the ERC, and they may be able to help your business too. There's no upfront charge either. They don't get paid until your business gets its refund. Many businesses believe they won't qualify based off incomplete or outdated information. So don't let this opportunity pass you by, because this payroll tax refund is only available for a limited time. Go to GetRefunds.com. That's GetRefunds.com.
All right, back to the show.
No. That's perfect. Well, back to this question. So, do you think that the fact that people have the optionality to basically set up their own infrastructure and run it is the main thing that we need to ensure continues to exist, which it is with Bitcoin, that makes it so much different than the legacy financial system, which you don't even have anything remotely close to that optionality to run on your own? Does that prevent the attack vector of centralizing forces? Is that enough?
Yes. I mean, people are going to be able to run their own infrastructure and just reduce the trust that they have had in other systems. Let me share this story with you, that we were processing payroll for Amboss, and we were thoughtful that something may be happening in the banking sector. Now we're processing payroll, and using a payroll provider, But what we didn't know was our payroll provider was banking at Silicon Valley Bank. And half a month's payroll had already left our account. And we find out soon after that Silicon Valley Bank has gone bankrupt.
Wow.
And it has no funds. Now, what situation are we in right now? Did we just lose half a month's payroll? And not because of any fault of ours, but simply because we were using a vendor that was banking at this bank that until then I had never even heard of. There is trust in our payment system. And this was like happening automatically. And I had no worries about it before, but now I'm concerned about it. Now I'm wondering, is the FDIC going to step in and bail out my deposits, my payroll? Am I going to get that money back at all? Or are they going to devalue the money and bail out the banks like they did in 2008? This is the problem that we're trying to solve by creating a complete alternative to any trust-based financial settlement. And we can do that using our own infrastructure and by using Bitcoin, which can't be devalued in that same way as the US dollar or any other fiat currency.
Talk to us a little bit more about the existing centralized payment system, because I know you are pretty well versed on all the issues that it currently has. But for people that aren't intimately familiar with the nuances of these issues, and then what we'll do is we'll also talk about the potential issues of a decentralized payment system like Bitcoin and layer 2. So let's go ahead and hit the existing legacy system and do a little bit of a compare and contrast.
So I've been reading this book called The Anatomy of the Swipe. And it goes into detail about, what happens, when you're actually swiping your payment card at a payment terminal. And you'll swipe your card, and then, soon after, you're going to see a nice check mark, whatnot. It says, oh yeah, transaction approved. And then, at least in the US, you're going to add some funds to it right after that as like a tip. And the actual debit from your account is the original amount, but then you're stacking on this tip on top of it. And the actual settlement from that payment doesn't happen until 45 to 60 days later. Now, during that time, no money actually moves until much after that swipe period, days, weeks, sometimes months. And during that period, while you're waiting for the actual settlement to happen, there's still a risk that the merchant, whoever sold you, your meal, your goods, what have you, that they may not actually receive those funds because you're going to pull what's called a chargeback. Mm-hmm. And so you can just reverse that payment. All of the fiat payment system that we've become accustomed to is a debit system. So if your information on your debit card gets leaked, then someone else is actually going to be able to pull money from your account. Now, that's the opposite way that Bitcoin operates, where every single payment is a push payment. So you're individually approving every time any funds leave your account or your wallet.
Any other issues that you'd like to highlight? I know that you've talked publicly about barriers to entry for competitors against Visa and MasterCard and things like that. You already mentioned the counterparty risk there with the Silicon Valley Bank and oh lordy. But yeah, how about the barriers to entry?
Yeah, when we look at payment processors of the world, really there's three: Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and just Visa, settles $5 trillion worth of payments every single year. So this is a massive industry, but Visa used to be a nonprofit and it is now a private company. It is using the same technology that was set up back in the 1970s. So there really hasn't been a whole lot of innovation that's happened in terms of payments. Yeah. So when you go to swipe your card, the merchant is actually going to pay about 3% of the transaction just to make that settlement happen. Now, on the consumer side of things, we've been enticed by the idea that we're going to get 1 to 2% cash back. So that's going to be money back in the account. But What we're not taking into account is the actual increase in prices just because of the inefficiency of the settlement system. So the prices that we're paying are being marked up by 3% or more just because of the fact that the merchant is actually going to have to pay those settlement fees and take on the risk that there could be chargebacks.
So, Jesse, I want to get into some of the really interesting things that you guys are now doing at Amboss, which is providing a marketplace, this Magma marketplace for people to open channels for individuals, for companies, for whoever it might be that's wanting inbound capacity, liquidity. Walk us through how you guys created this open marketplace, what it looks like, the number of people that are actually using it. Just tell us everything you got.
We launched Magma a little over a year ago, and we allow people to just say how much they'll charge to take their Bitcoin savings and allocate them towards payment rail. And so that's what's being created is with the Lightning channel is a new payment rail going to a new destination. So anybody that wants to start up a business and accept Lightning payments with their own node and their own infrastructure just goes on to amboss.space/magma and goes and clicks buy on one of those nodes. And they can also like review and determine whether that's a valuable node to buy a channel from. And depending on like the price that they're willing to pay, we'll get information about what's the value of liquidity that the market is finding. So you could price your channels very inexpensively, and then like we'll have a better sense of, you know, what's the cost of settlement from like continuously operating this new payment network. Yeah, this gives us each of these channels that are sold for like a month, 3 months, or 6 months at a time, they'll agree to keep it open, and they'll also promise to keep their routing fees very low. So they won't pay, consumers won't be paying a transaction fee each time. So a merchant can go through and just buy one of those channels and set up a new payment rail to their business.
Teach people why this is so different than the existing financial system, credit-based financial system, with respect to risk-free rates and what this might potentially offer in the future.
When you're using a credit card, for example, that issuer is essentially loaning you the funds, and they're going to charge a high interest rate if you fail to pay. Instead of doing that, what we've created with Lightning is a way to simply take your Bitcoin and make it be used for payments. And when you're doing that, you're actually not giving up custody of your Bitcoin, even if you're the channel creator. So you don't have to worry about someone else taking your Bitcoin, even though you've just increased the utility of this new monetary asset. Now I can use this awesome store of value as a medium of exchange. And I've just set up that network. Now I don't have to trust the other person, and I'm getting a yield off of it. So this is the first time that this has ever existed, is you can earn yield from your Bitcoin without having to trust any other party. Really, you just have to trust your own infrastructure that you've set up.
I'm going to put up a chart, Jesse, here so people can see what this looks like today. Describe this for people that are only listening to the audio so that they kind of know what we're looking at. But it's a yield curve. Would we call it yield as far as, the financial definitions get tricky here because you're not giving up custody of the coins. It's almost like you're renting the liquidity. I don't know what the proper terminology would be, but anyway, over to you.
There's really no words for it. But instead of LIBOR, where you have an idea of like a reference rate for interest, what you have up is called what we're calling the liner, which is the Lightning Network rate. And this is a dual index. There's two pieces to it. So there's the liner cost, which is what does it cost a merchant to get set up with liquidity? And we can see that when we first started the marketplace, there wasn't a ton of volume. So it was up closer to 5%, but we watched it drop down to about 2% that folks were paying for that initial bootstrap of liquidity. If they're paying 2%, that means that they're saving an entire percent of their transactions versus a payment processor. Now, on the other side of things, there's the people that are using their savings to create a new payment network. And that's what we're calling the liner yield. So that's the green line, which is below the liner cost. And that actually shows that people can earn yield without giving up custody of their funds at any point. So people can earn up to, what we're seeing is above 2% yield for providing liquidity to the Lightning Network. This is really where it comes together. Because on the one side, if you're a holder of Bitcoin, why aren't you using your Bitcoin to create a new payment network? And on the side of the business operator, why are you using a less efficient settlement method that uses credit and debt when you could use the Lightning Network and you could have instant settlement and no chargeback risk?
Jesse, I want to talk to you a little bit about the inscription stuff that's been happening on layer one. This has made the fees really blow out and get much higher. How has that impacted Lightning and channel management? Because anytime somebody wants to close a channel or open a channel, they got to do that on layer one, which has these high fees now. Just walk us through some of your thoughts on that.
By putting other things in the blockchain, everyone is essentially bidding to get into the Bitcoin blockchain and be part of this immutable record. When that happens, in order to create a channel, you're going to have to bid a higher price to be part of the Bitcoin blockchain. And it's costing a lot to actually create this new infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Now, despite the higher fees that are being paid, there's still an opportunity to earn yield by setting up this infrastructure. When folks are adding inscriptions, they're adding images and whatnot, and they're essentially stamping the blockchain. They're also doing that with new assets under this BRC20 standard. And consequently, there's been a lot more concern about, am I opening the channel, Lightning channel, to the right person, or to the point where it's just saying, okay, this is a crazy fee spike. I'm not going to pay a transaction fee that's quite that high. And I'll just wait until this hype, this mania is over, and then set up my infrastructure at some point in the future when I think the prices for a Bitcoin transaction will be more reasonable.
Have there been any metrics? You guys are doing the analytics and the data on everything Lightning. Is there any metric or chart that you like in particular, or that you think is really representative of a certain idea?
If you pull up the order details chart on Amboss, you can actually see this really significant gap in when we've seen Magma orders happen. And that was quite recently with this BRC20.
Oh yeah. Look at
excitement.
Is that right in here, Jesse? The start of May then.
It's just this huge gap where there was essentially zero volume through our marketplace for Lightning channels because the network was just well, forget about it. I'm not paying that much. Can't I just wait to set up the infrastructure at a time when fees are much more reasonable?
I love it. Recently, there was this announcement down at the Bitcoin Miami about ARC. And this was an attempt. Well, I don't know if attempt is the correct word, but it's a protocol that's trying to remove this burden for inbound liquidity that we talked about a little bit earlier. It also has some privacy benefits. I'm curious what your thoughts are on ARC and whether you think that it's going to be something that actually catches on, or if it just kind of fizzles out and kind of goes away. What are you thinking?
I would like put this in context because, Lightning was a white paper in 2016 and it's still early days and it's 7 years later. ARC has received a lot of excitement recently, and I hope the ideas accelerate. But I think that's really the stage that we're at right now, is like the initial idea phase. It's being talked about quite a bit. This discussion about, is this the direction that we want to take a second layer on Bitcoin? And what does it mean for the Lightning Network? It sounds like ARC may be able to work with Lightning in a way and using a shared UTXO model. It's still like early days to even understand what this thing is, although it's exciting to actually have potentially private payments and not have this inbound liquidity problem. One thing I'm curious about is the network effect, because with Lightning Network, we've got now businesses that are set up on it and developers that have like different camps and are working on different aspects of it. Like it's a whole like flourishing ecosystem of development that's happening. And that might be hard to replace just because of the network effects that it has. Like this is when you go down to El Salvador, like people are using Lightning. Like that is like the method of payment that people have become familiar with.
Let's take a quick break and hear from today's sponsors.
If we've learned anything over the past few years, it's that unexpected things can happen. For example, average IRA and 401k balances fell 20% last year according to Fidelity. We sure didn't expect that. But here's something that could help if you have an IRA or 401k. Physical gold in your IRA. The World Gold Council says even central banks are buying tons of gold. What does that tell you? Learn why many Americans are turning to a gold IRA with Augusta Precious Metals. Mark Levin and Joe Montana endorse Augusta and recommend them to their friends and family. If you have an IRA or 401k, call Augusta Precious Metals to get their free ultimate guide to gold IRAs. Call 855-222-4979. That's 855-222-4979. Again, call Augusta Precious Metals today at 855-222-4979. Are you curious how equity crowdfunding provides unique access to investment opportunities that are typically reserved for venture capitalists and private equity firms? Recently, I had the pleasure of speaking with Atacama co-founder and CEO Daniel H. Galancy about the evolution of capital formation and the rules that have evolved over time, allowing enterprises to challenge traditional capital raise norms through equity crowdfunding. During episode 541, How Equity Crowdfunding is Changing the Game, Daniel and I discussed the role equity crowdfunding plays in this tumultuous economic environment and its benefits for everyday investors. In fact, Atacama has opened its own successful equity crowdfunding round, and time is limited to get in on this exciting offer. Join me and thousands of others that have made an investment in Atacama by learning more at invest.atacama.com/WSB. That is invest.atacama.com/WSB. If you enjoy this podcast, you're going to love our free investing newsletter, We Study Markets. We realize that not everyone has the time to listen to a podcast every day or even every week. So we took the same type of content and put it into an easy-to-read free newsletter. In just 5 minutes a day, you can stay up to date with what's going on in the financial world. That means instead of mindlessly scrolling social media, you can quickly learn what's going on with the markets and your money, and it's completely free. Join over 30,000 other readers now at theinvestorspodcast.com/WeStudyMarkets. That's theinvestorspodcast.com/WeStudyMarkets.
All right, back to the show.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's very, very early days. I mean, you're effectively at the white paper phase. Like nobody's actually implementing anything on this protocol yet. The one thing that I found a little bit interesting, or maybe a barrier to use, is just the refresh. I guess there's a refresh that's required every 30 days for people that are using it. It almost seems like it might be a tool for larger companies or entities that are operating on Lightning in the future. Like maybe it's for them and not as much the end user, which is a little ironic because it almost seems like it's for end users to have immediate inbound liquidity. And it might not even be used by the retail or individuals in practical use, if at all. But I'm just curious to hear some of your thoughts on that. How about for a guy that's so close to Lightning, what is something that you think a lot of people are missing about the Lightning Network right now that you're excited about or you think is really important moving forward?
What I'm really excited about is enterprise adoption of the Lightning Network. And that comes in two forms. One, in just the formation of markets around Lightning. The fact that folks with Bitcoin holdings can start earning yield at very low risk without making the same mistakes that people made by allocating their Bitcoin into CeFi yield platforms. This whole system doesn't need to blow up and we can have cheaper payments. So that would be a win. And the second piece is after attending the MicroStrategy conference and having KPMG on one side of me and Fidelity on the other side, all done up in suits and getting palpably excited about the Lightning Network. Michael Saylor can essentially tip his employees for meeting their workout goals at work or showing up to meetings on time. And everybody in the room, like that I would never expect to be excited about Bitcoin and Lightning, are really excited about it. They're freaking out if they're going to be over a minute late to their next meeting because they would miss out on the sats that they would get. The other aspect is just new use cases. Nostr is incredible as a new social network and a social network protocol. Like we can have just internet native payments that are just flying around. You know, I'm posting a meme a day on Nostr and people are sending me sats just like throughout the day. I check my phone. I've got a new notification from Wallet of Satoshi saying, you know, you just received 21 sats or 101 sats. Just sending me like a little LOL message with Satoshis that I can save as, you know, real money and use my node to convert to Bitcoin, and I can move it to cold storage, what have you. The whole thing is exciting. It just really lowers the friction involved in payments.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. This past 12 months, everything just started to become very real. I know whenever I was just opening the channels earlier when I started using Amboss initially, like I was using Lightning, I was setting up these channels, but there wasn't really like any type of operational use case like out there. You know, you'd do like test transactions where you'd send a friend 100 sats or whatever, but there was nothing that was like real to it. But once you started using it on Nostr, seeing like what Michael's doing at MicroStrategy, and just people are really finally starting to harness this idea that if there's no fees for even the smallest 2-cent transaction, and I can immediately settle those two things, it's kind of phenomenal what type of use cases are starting to pop out of that were never possible before. Streaming sats to listen to podcasts or whatever it might be. And I think we're just kind of just starting to hit the tip of the iceberg of where some of this is going to start going. So I'm with you, and I totally share that sentiment. Jesse, if people want to learn more about you, is there anything else that you want to hand people off to teach them more about Lightning or Bitcoin or Amboss? Fire away. Let them know.
Certainly read as much as you can. If you understand Bitcoin and you want to dive deeper and start to understand not only Bitcoin as a store of value, but Bitcoin as a settlement network and Bitcoin for payments, for global settlement, yeah, I'd push them to pick up mastering Lightning and start building, run a node, install ThunderHub, and start exploring on Amboss.
I love it. Jesse, this was a real pleasure, and thanks for making time to come on the show.
It's my pleasure, Preston. Thanks so much.
If you guys enjoyed this conversation, be sure to follow the show on whatever podcast application you use. Just search for We Study Billionaires. The Bitcoin-specific shows come out every Wednesday, and I'd love to have you as a regular listener. If you enjoyed the show or you learned something new or you found it valuable, if you can leave a review, we would really appreciate that. And it's something that helps others find the interview in the search algorithm. So anything you can do to help out with a review, we would just greatly appreciate. And with that, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you again next week. Hey everyone, Preston here. I just wanted to take a quick moment to tell you that I'll be in Austin, Texas from the 24th through the 27th of August for the BitBlockBoom Bitcoin Conference. This is an incredible event that's Bitcoin only, and it has some of the best speakers like Parker Lewis, Jimmy Song, Robert Breedlove, and many others. If you would like to attend and hang out in person, go to the website bitblockboom.com, and at checkout, use discount code Preston to get 20% off your tickets. I would love to meet you there. This is one of my favorite events, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it as well.
Thank you for listening to TIP. To access our show notes, courses, or forums, go to theinvestorspodcast.com. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Before making any decisions, consult a professional. This show is copyrighted by the Investors Podcast Network. Written permissions must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting.